the most paradoxical election of our times.
Well, guys, it's all over but the shouting.
It's been nothing but shouting.
Whatever your turn!
The polls say the public favors Republicans, about whom the number who are very positive is 12%.
It's going to be a big day.
The polls say the public wants some non-career politician businessmen, even though the economy crashed when we had to bail business out.
People want change, and they know where they're going to get it.
The polls say some of the public wants a grassroots third option. Lawn care courtesy the most veteran of political operatives.
There's going to be a big Tea Party tidal wave coming to Washington.
With Chris Matthews, Rachel Maddow, Lawrence O'Donnell, and Eugene Robinson in New York. Lester Holt with the Voice of the Voter exit polling. Chuck Todd inside the numbers. Howard Feynman at the Listening Post. Ed Schultz at Reed headquarters in Nevada. Chris Hayes on the Perriello campaign in Virginia. Nora O'Donnell in Washington. Kevin Tibbles at Paul headquarters in Kentucky. Peter Alexander at Murray headquarters in Seattle. Ron Mott at Rubio headquarters in Florida. Janet Shamlian at O'Donnell headquarters in Delaware. And Kristen Welker at Miller headquarters in Alaska. With guests Howard Dean, Senator Robert Menendez, Senator Dick Durbin, Congressman Mike Pence, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann, Congressman Chris Van Hollen, Governor Ed Rendell, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, Jonathan Alter, and Ariana Huffington. This is MSNBC's live continuing coverage of the 2010 midterm elections. Good evening from New York. I'm Keith Olbermann. President Obama said today his agenda is on the line, but Election Day 2010 will decide even more than that, whether Republicans win back control of the House, which they are widely expected to do according to the late polls, whether Republicans win back control of the Senate, which they are widely expected to fall short of doing, according to that polling. More than President Obama's agenda is on the line, the ability of the U.S. government to get anything done. In the case of some Republicans, the desire to stop the government from getting anything done is on the line today. We'll be tracking control of the House and the Senate all night, possibly longer than that. Try next month, and the Supreme Court if some Pacific nail-biters come down to the wire. Alaska, as well as gubernatorial races, which could affect how widely and where President Obama's initiatives are implemented, as well as who will get to draw the voting lines for what is already on everybody's minds, the presidential election of 2012, which starts tomorrow morning. With me now to start this long evening, the host of Hardball and, of course, my long-standing cohort, colleague, partner on these nights of adventure and fun, Chris Matthews. Chris, 130
dreams of the Democratic Party, comprehensive health care, and a lot of people wish the president had aimed higher, you know, and so forth. I think we could probably all agree that it would be unanimous along the whole Democratic spectrum. We wish Democrats had done a better job of in the communication wars. They were clearly behind almost every day of the last 2 years in the communication battle. The Republicans were very successful, very clever, and very quick at defining the language in which issues were being discussed and thus the terms of debate. So it wasn't end-of-life care, it was death panels, and it wasn't comprehensive health care, it was big government takeover. They're good at that.
Can I just say a word about that media battle? Complexity is an extremely easy thing to attack. Death panel is a very simple phrase. The counter to it, fully explained, takes a few paragraphs. Yeah. You will lose that argument in American politics.
No, it's possible. I mean, we suggested it while it was going on that perhaps the term, someone should have anticipated that and anticipated it with some term like life panel. I mean, literally just go into marketing and message. Cut that bill up and go, okay, this is how we sell it. Subtract all of the ethics from the process and just say life panel.
But by the time you did that, and did that very effectively on television, the Democrats had lost their ability to find that phrase.
It shouldn't be done as somebody's hobby, and that's
well, we have a phrase and no one reached for it, which was living will.
Yeah.
It's a positive term.
But even that has a certain, well, we can get into this later. We're going to start now to look around elements of our coverage tonight. Chuck Todd, our political director, is covering tonight's elections by the numbers, and that's all you're going to get is numbers. But Chuck has the special numbers in the by the numbers group. Chuck, take it away.
Well, look, I'm going to do this in here. Let's go to brass tacks. Let's figure out the magic numbers, of course, for the Republicans tonight are 39 and 10. They need 39 House seats. So the question is, what to watch in these first poll closings. And what I'm watching here, obviously these are the 7 o'clock poll closings, but there are a ton of House races in here. 3 big ones in Indiana, at least 1 truly competitive one in Kentucky, 4 maybe in Virginia, another 4 or 5 in South Carolina and Georgia. And so what I would say to folks is watch these results at 7 o'clock as they start coming in. In Kentucky, the 6th district, this is Lexington, Ben Chandler. Keith, you know the Chandler name well. This is the great-grandson of Happy Chandler, of course, the famous baseball commissioner who integrated baseball. If he is in a very tight race, or if he is losing, this tells you the size of the night for the Republicans, the potential size of the pickup that could be well over 40 seats, well into the 50s here. Another one that I'm watching is the 2nd district in Indiana. Look, Republicans expect to take 2 in Indiana, the 8th and the 9th. If they get this 3rd, this tells you it's truly a wave-type election. This is the 2nd district in Indiana. It's a district that President Obama carried in 2008 when he narrowly carried Indiana. Another one is the suburbs of Washington, D.C. Look, we've all woken up, Chris and I have woken up to a surprising number of attack ads in the last week between Jerry Connolly and Keith Fimian, the Republican here. This is a district that won 57% for President Obama. And Jerry Connolly is somebody that voted for everything when it came to President Obama's agenda. And if he is in a tight race, if we're not seeing this race called very early, very quickly, this tells you about 2 things, frankly, and that is Democratic turnout. Maybe it's a little lackluster in Virginia, nothing at the top of the ticket, and the enthusiasm on the Republican side. And then finally, I want to bring people to the 7:30 poll closings, because here is where we're going to get our first taste of what type of real chances do the Republicans have of picking up the Senate. It's always been a tough thing for them to do, but in order to do it, they got to win West Virginia. There is just no way around it here. My apologies there for that. They have to win West Virginia in order to get to the 10, because sweeping Washington and California, which when you start looking at the path to 10, it seems like a very difficult thing to do. Those are very blue states. West Virginia, by the way, guys, the classic state where Democrats, Joe Manchin, tried to localize the race. John Racy, the Republican, totally nationalized the race. This is a red state. So do voters show up to the polls and vote against Washington, or vote for for the governor that they like with a 70% approval rating, guys? Keith?
Chuck Todd, thank you. And just to emphasize Chuck's point on this, this is my list here, and you don't have to zoom in on it or anything. That's just the stuff before 11 o'clock, the key House races. Just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, what you're going to look at with us throughout the night. Let's go on the road now. Ed Schultz, the host of the Ed Schultz Show here on MSNBC, is in Las Vegas, and you can read just behind him the senator part, which tells you that he's in Harry Reid's headquarters, and has that perspective and also the bigger picture for us on the night. Ed, good evening.
Good evening, Keith. You said we got 400 people working on this tonight. Well, I think I got the best job, because this is what the Democrats are watching tonight. I had 3 senators call me today and ask me, Eddie, how's Harry doing? Well, the exit polls, it's neck and neck, as expected. Down the stretch, Harry Reid has been very aggressive to get out, to do the smiling, to get him in a different mode with the American public, because when you see him on the Senate floor, he's always so serious, he's always so sullen. But this is a close one. There's no question about it. It's going to be a nail-biter down to the finish tonight. And Sharon Angle, staying true to form during her unorthodox campaign, told a radio talk show host today here in Las Vegas that it's time for candidates to teach the media a lesson, and that we need to bring back professionalism to reporting. The reporters here in Nevada have been reduced to airport journalism. She took a shot at that, too, said that this is no place to do any reporting in an airport. So this campaign has been on steroids since day one. It has been unorthodox. It's been unpredictable. But Harry Reid, you can sense that there is a very quiet confidence tonight coming out of his camp. He is no stranger to close races. It was back in 1998 when he then defeated Congressman John Ensign by 400 votes. we could be in that neighborhood tonight. It's going to be one to watch. It's going to go into the wee hours of the morning. And I think that Harry Reid is going to surprise a lot of people. He has faced an onslaught of corporate money. And Keith, it's not so much that, you know, Sharon Angle is such a great candidate or would make such a great senator. As it is, Harry Reid is so controversial with so many voters in this state. The question is, are there enough people out there that want to save Harry Reid's job as opposed to seeing some type of change? It's not the candidate Sharon Angle. It's the money that in the onslaught that he has been fighting so much throughout this campaign. But you sense a real quiet confidence amongst the Reid people tonight.
Ed Schultz in Las Vegas, where if we're in that neighborhood where it's very close and 400 votes, you better rent something because we're going to be in that neighborhood for a couple days, if not weeks, plus lawsuits involved too. Thank you, Ed. We'll get back to you throughout the evening, of course. Luke Russert joins us now, our Capitol Hill correspondent from Capitol Hill, on his way to the RNC event later this evening as they prepare for what is universally expected to be, as Mr. Boehner put it tonight, a good day, thus a good night. Luke, how good a night do they think it is? Are they giving you any hints?
Right now, Keith, they're saying that they're taking nothing for granted, that they will not actually address, more so Mr. Boehner will not actually address the election watch event until they are 100% confident that they do have the House of Representatives. That being said, strategists who are very close to the GOP leadership have told me today that they fully expect to at least get those 39 seats, possibly even 50 or 60 seats. John Boehner right now is apparently at his Washington, D.C. based apartment. He's going to go to the hotel, the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Washington, D.C. around 8 p.m. From there, he'll be in almost a command center in constant contact with Pete Sessions, head of the NRCC. He'll be congratulating candidates who have been victorious and constantly monitoring the phones. But the Republicans have really said, Keith, that this is not so much a cause for celebration because the nation is in the midst of terrible unemployment. You won't see any confetti or balloons dropping at this election watch event tonight. They went so far as to call it an election watch, not an election party, because they don't want to give off the idea that they're somehow in a celebration mode when so many people are downtrodden, when so many people are having difficulty reaching the American dream. So it'll be interesting to see how that message is conveyed this evening. But at the end of the day, they certainly are confident that John Boehner will be the next Speaker of the House for the 113th Congress. Keith? 112th Congress, sorry.
Commendable
There's
restraint.
So many of them.
Yes, right. We might, by the time this one's over, we might be voting already for the 113th. Thank you, Luke.
Indeed.
And commendable restraint on the Republicans to not drop any balloons tonight. The results are beginning to trickle in. You've already seen some of them on the board here in the voting districts in Indiana and Kentucky, where the polls will have been closed statewide in Indiana. They're staggered, not the voters, just the polls and the closings. Everybody's closed by 7 o'clock. A note about exit polling that was referred to earlier. We're only going to actually characterize exit polls and any other information and any results after the polls have closed in the individual locality we're talking about, whether that's statewide or in a congressional district, the district itself. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have the first look at the first set of exit polling, plus the man responsible for getting Democrats elected to the Senate, Senator Menendez of New Jersey. MSNBC's election coverage continues after this. The results begin to come in on election night 2010. Heavy lead for Rand Paul to replace the retiring Jim Bunning in Kentucky, but obviously 1% of the vote in. This number will presumably change, at least the total vote will. In Indiana, another replacement, the retiring Democrat Evan Bayh, and the hopes of Brad Ellsworth, the congressman, to replace him. And again, with 1% in, nothing more than just a token look at a 15-point lead for Coates going into it. Throughout the night, we'll be hearing the voice of the voter through our exit polls, and these are carefully prescribed and described questions and sort of pulse beats of the American population. For that, throughout the evening, and for the first time tonight, we go to Lester Holt. Lester.
Keith, we're really going to feel what people are thinking when they go into the polls. Our NBC News exit poll, The Voice of the Voters, is giving us our first look at what matters to voters as they go to the polls. And Keith, this is a no-brainer. It's all about the economy. Look at the numbers there. Almost 9 out of 10 say the economy is not in good shape. But the same number are worried about the future. They're pessimistic. And for a lot of people, they have good reason because it hits home in a very personal way. Look at it. 29% have had a job layoff in the family. 42% say their finances are worse than they were the last time they went to the polls 2 years ago. All that is translating into anger. We've been hearing it throughout the campaign. People are mad. Today, 26% of voters said they're angry at the government. Nearly half are dissatisfied. Less than a quarter said they're satisfied or enthusiastic. So when you consider all the negative feelings toward government, it's probably not a surprise that a solid majority think the government is doing too much, 56% in all. 39% want the government to do more. So where's all that anger and unhappiness being channeled? Well, the same number of people said they have an unfavorable view of the Democrats as have an unfavorable view of the Republicans, 53% each. And President Obama is pretty much in the same boat, with 54% of those who went to the voting booth today saying they disapprove of the job he's doing as president. Keith, we're going to keep you posted on all this throughout the evening as we continue to listen to the voice of the voter.
Lester, fascinating and conflicting results there. Thank you kindly. We'll be back with you shortly. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. It is, of course, responsible, as the name suggests, for getting Democrats elected to the United States Senate in the 37 races tonight. Senator Menendez joining us now. Thank you for your time tonight, sir.
Good to be with you.
Will you know tonight whether or not you've held the Senate, or do you expect this to be one of these long, dragged-out, two-week processes?
Well, it's really our hope that tonight we will exhibit a Democratic majority in the United States Senate. It's what I believe will happen at the end of these elections, and we're hoping that that becomes crystal clear tonight.
Do you have a poll surprise that you need to maintain the Senate, or if things work out as have been advertised for the polling so far, do you feel safe?
I think that everything that we've seen in both our polling, our modeling results today so far in terms of turnout leads me to believe that we will retain the majority in the Senate. And the question is, how robust will it be? And that's what we'll be looking at throughout the whole evening. But I think that considering midterm election history going back to the Civil War, which means the president's party loses seats, considering $64 million of corporate expenditures against Senate Democrats alone, they're obviously spending that money to pursue some agenda. It's not the people's agenda. And considering the fact that we are in the midst of an economy that we inherited from 8 years of Bush's failed policies and trying to turn it around, I think it'll be an exceptional evening in that respect.
Senator, it's Chris Matthews. I'm amazed that you've had a pretty good successful run, I think, at getting the kind of candidates you wanted this year. The Republicans, on the other hand, have gotten a lot of stray cats and dogs as candidates. A strange group here that you would never have predicted a year out. Look at Mike Lee knocking off the incumbent a senator in Utah who had like an 89% conservative rating, and they said he wasn't conservative enough. Joe Miller coming out of nowhere. Rand Paul, of course, knocking off their favorite, Grayson. And then Ken Buck doing the same thing in Colorado. You're a little better off tonight, even though it looks like a tough night, aren't you, than you would have been had the Republican Party been as disciplined as its record would suggest over the years?
Well, we've got great candidates, both incumbents and those running in some of those seats. So I'm not going to diminish them in any way. They've run fantastic campaigns, and many of them are great United States senators. Having said that, the reality is that many of these candidates are outside of the mainstream of the electorate in their state. They espouse policies. 16 of them want to privatize or eliminate Social Security. 11 of them want to do the same thing to Medicare. 10 of them want to abolish the Department of Education. 4 of them want to either eliminate or reduce the minimum wage. These are positions outside of the mainstream of the electorate in these states, and therefore have allowed our candidates to do what I said they needed to do throughout this whole cycle, which is to create an election of contrast, make a clear choice for the voters, and where our candidates have done that successfully, I think we will be very successful tonight.
Well, just to get your answer, I'm sorry. Are you agreeing that you're lucky to get these people that are outside the mainstream? You'd have a tougher night tonight if you had to run against real Republicans, regular Republicans. I want you to say the obvious, that you're running against some wackos tonight, and it's the best break you ever got, even if it's a tough night. You don't want to say that.
Well, these people, too many people are outside of the mainstream on that side of the equation in this election, and a lot of our people clearly have struck that responsive chord with their electorate. They understand. Look, we understand people are hurting in this country, and the fundamental question tonight is, do you want to give the majorities back to those individuals in the Republican Party who both worked at and espoused the views of the failed Bush economic policies, or do you want to continue to move forward with progress and prosperity, creating jobs, so that we can move in a different direction. That's fundamentally what the voters have to decide. So I've been traveling the country, say, take your anger and target it at those who put you in the mess in the first place.
Senator Menendez, it's Rachel Maddow here. You mentioned the impact in these elections of outside spending. If you look at the overall spending, candidates on the Republican and Democratic side have spent roughly the same amount of money this year in the aggregate. But Democratic groups have been outspent by about $100 million by Republican-leaning outside groups. Is that the sort of thing that Democrats just want to stop? Or heading forward towards 2012, do Democrats have a plan to try to equalize those numbers?
Well, first of all, it is my hope that we will end up with a majority tonight and seek to create changes in the law that we tried to do and that Republicans opposed it. We now know why they opposed even simple disclosure of corporate money in these elections. It all went overwhelmingly to them. Now, big oil isn't spending money to make sure that they have more limited drilling and not have, they want limited liability. Big banks, they don't like the Wall Street reform. Big insurance wants to continue to deny people arbitrarily and capriciously. So all of these interests are spending enormous amounts of money with the Republicans. So it is my hope that maybe there might be a rule change in the Senate and we would have the opportunity to pass some reform to this and then, make sure that the House follows suit so that at least we can have simple disclosure. That would dramatically limit the scope of it. I really don't want to play catch-up ball in corporate money. I want to be able to have public disclosure and limit the influence of these outside groups so that the people choose who comes to Congress and does the people's work versus the special interests.
Senator Bob Menendez, in charge of getting the Democrats in the Senate to stay in the Senate or be elected to it. We thank you kindly for your time, and we'll speak with you again throughout the night.
Thank you.
We'll be speaking, in fact, with Senator Menendez's counterpart on the House side, Congressman Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, in a moment. Much more ahead as we await the results from Indiana and Kentucky. The polls closing there at the top of the hour. In fact, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia closing at the top of the hour. Those are the early looks. MSNBC's election coverage continuing after this. That's the outside. This is the inside of MSNBC headquarters in New York as we look at the 2010 midterms for the entirety of the evening. We'll be with you as long as possible. Congressman Chris Van Hollen of Maryland is, of course, the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He's responsible for getting Democrats elected to the House. Congressman, thanks for your time tonight.
Good evening.
Yeah, we just talked to Senator Menendez, who was optimistic, as all the polls had suggested, regarding the Democrats in the Senate. Obviously, with a first-term president who is expected to lose statistically 25 House seats, no matter who he is. And under these circumstances, the numbers that have been predicted have been far higher for your first-term Democratic president. Do you have a sense yet of this evening in terms of the Dems in the House?
Well, we do. I mean, so far it's clear that the voters are proving a lot of the pundits wrong with respect to the Democratic turnout. We saw a very healthy Democratic turnout in the early vote, and today we're seeing a higher than projected Democratic turnout around the country. So this thing is far from over. I know all the Washington pundits and everybody else have said we're moving on and this thing is it's over. The fact of the matter is it's not. And, Yogi Berra said it best. It ain't over till it's over, and the fight is still going on all around the country right now.
Does turnout necessarily mean a good thing for Democrats if there's a heavy turnout from agitated Tea Party members or Republicans of other stripes? Is that necessarily a good thing for you?
Well, the turnout I'm referring to is Democratic turnout. In other words, people monitor the Democratic voters, the Democratic-leaning voters, and they're monitoring the numbers of those folks who come out to the polls. And so far, we're seeing higher than projected turnouts among Democrats. What the pundits had predicted was this huge gap, this political energy deficit, and the fact of the matter is we're not seeing that right now on the ground.
Give me one thing materially to hang our hats on that we're looking at in the next in the first set of those supposed milestone races throughout the night, the bellwethers. Is there one that you're looking at that you can share with us that will tell us where the whole night is going?
Well, Keith, there's not one bellwether district in the House races. I think we get a pretty good sense when the polls close on the East Coast, looking at places like New York and Pennsylvania. We have a lot of House seats there. By all accounts, right now we're having a heavy Democratic turnout in the suburban areas of Philadelphia. Turnout is good in New York, not just in the New York City area, but upstate as well. Right now, of course, the polls are closing in Indiana. Early accounts suggest that there was a good turnout for Democrats in Barron Hills district. We'll have to see if that materializes. So, look, you can't pick out one bellwether House seat and say if they win this or lose this, that determines the outcome. But I think you'll get a pretty good idea from what happens along the Atlantic coast. And so,
Congressman, this is Gene Robinson. The president and others spent a lot of the last month trying to convince young voters to come out to the polls. What's your indication so far of whether those young voters indeed are voting or in either the usual numbers or greater than usual numbers or less than usual numbers? What's happening?
That's a good question. It's still too early to tell. We do know that down in Tom Perriello's district there was a pretty healthy turnout in the University of Virginia area. We'll have to see how that fits into the overall equation. We know other places the president went, like Bridgeport, Connecticut. They're having a big, heavy turnout. In fact, they ran out of ballots in Bridgeport earlier today, which is obviously a good sign for Democrats. Again, look, these are obviously preliminary signs, but the early signs indicate that the pundits were wrong, at least with respect to this notion that the Democrats were just going to stay at home. Democrats are energized. They know what's at stake in this election. And we also believe a lot of those independent voters, when they take a hard look at these Republican candidates, as Bob Menendez described them, just exactly right, they are way off on the right extremes. I mean, these are people in the House races like the Senate races. Good numbers of them want to abolish the Department of Education. A lot of them want to privatize Social Security, which would, of course, be great for the guys on Wall Street, but terrible for the retirement security of seniors. These guys are not the mainstream candidates that centrist voters in these districts are looking for. So, again, I know that all the pundits declared the House races over weeks ago. That's just not the case, and we remain optimistic.
Mr. Van Hollen of Maryland, Chris Van Hollen, great thanks, and it's open season on pundits for both sides. Thank you, sir.
Good to be with you.
Chris?
Let's go to Mike Pence. He's a Republican. He's Republican Conference Chairman, of course, and he's number 3 in the leadership. Mr. Pence, there's no one's career I like to follow more closely than yours, because you passed up a chance to be the nominee of your party for the United States Senate in what looked like a very good opportunity to become a United States Senator this year. There's word out there that you may not be running again for leadership. Are you going to be one of the real beneficiaries this year of this good year for Republicans and come out of this with a bang and run for president?
Well, look, we'll let the future take care of itself. I think for now, here in Indiana, we're very encouraged by some of the early returns. And but I want to say right out of the gate, Chris, look, I don't think this is so much a victory for any political party this evening. I think it's a victory for the American people. I think the American people grew frustrated with runaway federal spending and a tone-deaf Washington, D.C., really under both political parties. And they showed our party the door in 2006 and again in 2008. And I think what's happening across the country today is really the American people reasserting themselves into the process. Republicans, independents, many Democrats who are just saying enough is enough. We want to send a new generation of leaders to Washington, D.C. that are going to take the priorities of the American people, fiscal responsibility, personal responsibility, and put those right back in the center of our national government.
Let's talk about the first 100 days should you take control of the U.S. House of Representatives, which of course originates all the tax measures and many of the spending measures through the appropriations process. What would be your down payment to the Republican voter watching tonight, or the fearful Democratic progressive voter tonight? What do you expect to give the voters tonight for voting Republican in the first 100 days?
Well, look, I think there's nothing more important right now than doing everything we can to get this economy moving again. And if Republicans are given a second chance to lead our national legislature tonight, I think you'll see immediate action on making sure that no American sees a tax increase in January, not one. We'll also look for additional tax relief that'll encourage the kind of capital formation that'll jumpstart this economy. Right. Then it's about fiscal discipline. Then it's about repealing and replacing their government takeover of health care. But, you know, as I was working the polls today in Newcastle and Rushville, Indiana, you know, there's a lot of families hurting out there, Chris, and they really know the last thing we want to do in the worst economy in 25 years is let taxes go up on anybody in the city or on the farm. And I think you'll see Republicans get right after that issue and then deal with the larger issues and the larger aspects that have drawn millions of Americans out in these midterm elections today.
Thank you. That's big news. Tax cuts, first goal of the Republicans. Thank you, Mr. Pence, for joining us tonight.
Where's the news in that?
Thank you, Chris.
There's no news in that. That's all they do. That's all they live for.
There was
no news.
just to make the point, I think it's somewhat beneficent because
it's going to be done
a lot of
people
are in the Republican Party of the more further out wing are saying their first goal is to repeal health care. His is to cut taxes. I thought it was interesting.
That's going to be done in the lame duck session before they even get to the next.
There's also one
thing. They're going to eliminate.
They're going to. They have to deal with the tax issue before you get to January 1st, and so that.
Answer this, though, and I was going to ask the congressman this question. What would, practically speaking, how do you repeal the health care reform?
Well, notice what he says.
All right, but he said repeal.
And replace.
And replace.
How do you do that without a presidential
But how does he do anything if you don't have enough to override a
so
veto?
the pressure, it's all academic in the House. If they just have a Republican House, a Democratic Senate, Democratic President, they're just going to, all they'll have an opportunity to do is pass something that's academic that will not go anywhere. If they don't do repeal, clean repeal, the Tea Party revolts. Their replace piece, when they say repeal and replace, they mean to replace 80% of the Obama bill, all of the heavy insurance regulations they intend to replace according to their own statements.
Do you do that without an override of a veto? Wouldn't the president use a veto in any repeal bill?
In these situations, the House passes bills, just like cap and trade. The House passed cap and trade last year, nothing happens. That's what you're going to see, a bunch of cap and trade style bills pass the House. If that, because why take the risk? This is your problem you have when you only have the one body. Why take the risk on any kind of risky vote if the Senate's never going to take action, if the president's going to veto it? So they may be paralyzed on their own terms within their own party.
I was just going to say that, Chris, I think that was important when you pointed out what's your down payment going to be to Republican voters or to fearful Democratic voters voting tonight? What are you promising to do? I think it's going to be important to watch them on social issues. Mike Pence, in particular, has been one of these conservative Republicans this year who's very ambitious, who's been promising that social issues are not off the agenda, that abortion is still central, that civil rights issues, being against civil rights issues, is still central to them. And I think it'll be interesting to watch whether or not they actually take these pointless symbolic votes in the House that don't go anywhere on social issues as a way of continuing to freak out Democrats and
There is also a long tradition, though, of Republicans taking social conservatives for granted and giving lip service to their issues.
Or selling them out.
To defend my argument, my defense of a goal here is to make news, try to find news tonight. It seems to me that if a guy like Mike Pence, who is so politically smart, gave a response to someone like me in this network to soften the blow. We're not going after health care first thing. Our down payment is tax relief for everybody. And then it is capital formation, which means tax breaks for business. That's been my assumption for a while. What they're really going to try to do is push the fiscal stuff and stay away from the social.
That's what they want to talk about. But when they're talking to their own people, all they're talking about is abortion. Look at Mike Pence's address to the Values Voters Summit. Look at the people who are doing these Family Research Council prayer events. Look at these people who are who are totally happy to appear with this guy like Engel and these patriot pastors and these guys who are driving a to the right of Falwell agenda.
I think Ronald Reagan taught them all a lesson. Stick to the fiscal.
Chris,
That's when they're talking to us, they do.
I think you're right that Mike Pence is the kind of politician who would like to play it safe. I don't think the Tea Party's going to let them play it safe.
That's right.
The polls in Indiana close at the top of the hour, all of the last of them. Also Georgia and Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, and Virginia. And if you don't think that matters, there's 15 bellwethers from our calculations at NBC News just at 7 o'clock, 14 minutes hence. And also before that time, Chuck Todd will join us for another look ahead at the Senate races tonight, including the two big ones that close in 15 minutes in Indiana and Kentucky, as MSNBC's coverage of Election Night 2010 continues after this. Closings within 10 minutes now. 7 o'clock Eastern, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont, Virginia. We hope you're able to characterize many of the key Senate races in those states at that hour, not before. In the interim, let's go to Chuck Todd, who again is covering tonight's election by the numbers to look forward to two of those keys, the Indiana and Kentucky Senate closings at 7. Chuck?
Well, how you doing, Keith? Well, look, I'm going to show you here. We have a little bit. These are all the Senate races up. 37 of them, a ton this year because there's a bunch of special elections for all those appointed senators, by the way, who got there because of jobs in the Obama administration. And we can go along here and show you the path to 10 if Republicans are going to figure it out. It starts with the first four that they believe they'll have in the bank, and that's Indiana, that's Arkansas. My apologies here for touching. That's North Dakota right here. And then there's Wisconsin. Wisconsin's one that Republicans and Democrats are feeling pessimistic, Republicans feeling optimistic. Then they have to, their next three would have to be Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Colorado. Those have all been very close races, but they would expect the wind at their back. The question is, that's 7. Where would they get the other 3? Well, they're counting on 3 places to do this. 3 of the 4 that they would need to do. At 7:30, polls close in West Virginia. I think we're going to get a good idea there. They would need that one if they would have a realistic chance. And why do I say that? Because the next 3, where they would have to win 2, are Nevada, California, and Washington State. California and Washington, very blue states, as we know. President Obama spent a lot of time there over the last month trying to shore up both Barbara Boxer and Patty Murray. And then Nevada, when you talk to both Republicans and Democrats, they will both agree on one thing. The single best get-out-the-vote machine, the single best ground game in the country may be Harry Reid's in Nevada. Now, he may be very unpopular right now, but that would be a reason why that could stand in the way of Republicans getting a 10th seat. So that's one way to look at the path tonight. But the first place to look, 7:30 tonight, Keith, West Virginia.
Chuck Todd, by the numbers, no touching. Thanks, Chuck. Our first results tonight coming up at the top of the hour when the polls close in Kentucky and Indiana. And again, we mentioned Georgia, South Carolina, Vermont, Virginia. We're going to get as much business done out of the way so we can get you those results at the stroke of 7 o'clock, 7 minutes hence. Stand by. I'm told we will have Indiana and Kentucky Senate calls at the top of the hour, but before that, fascinating dynamics about that Kentucky race, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul in particular. The Huffington Post's Howard Feynman is in our campaign listening post, which may look familiar to some of you who watch our show. Howard, what you got?
Well, what I've got is that the Rand Paul people are over the top thankful to Mitch McConnell, who behind the scenes and in public did a tremendous amount of work for a guy he once opposed. McConnell raised tons of money for Rand Paul, has tried to advise him on the issues, has connected him up with national Republican donors and so forth in an effort to make Rand Paul, in effect, his ambassador to however many Tea Party senators there are that McConnell's going to have to be dealing with. And one thing that McConnell has promised is that there will, in fact, be an early vote on repealing health care.
Howard Feynman at the Listening Post. Thank you, Howard, and get out of my chair. Coming up at the top of the hour, just kidding. The first results of the night. The polls closed in Indiana, Kentucky, Georgia, South Carolina, Vermont, Virginia. We'll have the calls on the Senate races in the 2 keys coming up. Seconds to 7 o'clock in the East. Polls closing as I speak in 5 states, and we're now ready for our first results in the Senate. We'll start with Kentucky. The Senate there, the race can be projected from the 7 p.m. poll closing. NBC News projects that Rand Paul, the ophthalmologist from Kentucky, is the projected winner for the Senate to replace the retiring Jim Bunning. In Indiana, Congressman Brad Ellsworth, the Blue Dog, losing to Dan Coates, the projected winner. My NBC News, the former senator back in the saddle again in Indiana. No surprise in South Carolina, Jim DeMint is your projected winner. My NBC News over Alvin Green, who is still running. In Vermont, no surprise there. As expected, the veteran Pat Leahy holds on to his seat in a state that went 68-31 for Obama last time, solid D remaining. In the Georgia Senate race between Mr. Isaacson, the Republican, and Mr. Thurmond, the Democrat, this is too early to call. That is an actual interpretation. That is language, as opposed to suggesting it being too close to call, which is the other popular number. Too early to call, meaning we may have an idea of what's going on, but it's too early to say with any authority that it's going to hold that way. See the difference between leaning and we don't know. So here's what it looks like. The change in the Senate that we know about so far, obviously a Republican pickup. One, Indiana. I hope it's in the correct order there, Indiana. Here's what it looks like mathematically. If you just returned to the country after 20 years, blue would be the Democrats and red would be the Republicans. That's, again, what's firmed up. The size of the Senate has not been reduced to just 67 members. We haven't gone back to 1913 or thereabouts. So there it is. The two big wins, Chris. Rand Paul.
Right. By the way, our sign on the Senate is from the back of the room.
Okay.
Looking forward to you're used to the Democrats being on the right, looking from the front.
All right. Well, Rand Paul in particular in Kentucky completing
Yeah, I think that race. You know how in sports, especially well, let's go to basketball. When you're behind, you got to foul to get the ball back, and it never looks pretty because nobody likes the fouls. But it's the only way to get the ball back. I think near the end of this race, Jack Conway fouled. I think that ad that they put together, they basically attacked the guy's religion, crossed the line, and I think that probably hurt him a bit. But he probably was told by his consultants he had to take a chance because he was fading there. It doesn't look pretty. I think Jack Conway will be running again and again. I think he's got a lot of Clinton in him. I think he's really ambitious. He's an attractive candidate. He will be back again for governor next time, I expect. This guy has a future. It's just not tonight.
You know a little bit about Rand Paul.
You made him.
Rand Paul announced his Senate candidacy on my show.
Yeah.
And when he won the primary over Trey Grayson, who was the establishment candidate, he came back to my show, and we had a long, strange 20-minute discussion, which consisted of me asking him the same question over and over and over and over and over again. I was asking him about whether or not he agrees with the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And the reason that I kept asking it is because he wouldn't answer. And he was previously on the record saying that he believed that parts of the 1964 Civil Rights Act were wrong, that private businesses should be allowed to discriminate, that's what he believed as part of his small government philosophy. And he'd been on the record quite clearly about it in the past. And I just kept asking him about it over and over again because I knew that was his position, and I couldn't believe that as such a self-declared principled guy that he wouldn't restate what his clear position on it had been now that he'd won the primary. And he wouldn't, and he ran away from me, and then he ran away from his previous issue on it, and then he tried to blame the whole thing on me later.
He was running for Senate.
He was running for Senate, and so his old views were
to go a little Marcus Aurelius on you, who's supplying the surprise here?
Yeah. Well,
so here's the story. The message here, let's be Machiavellian.
Yep.
You played your right as a reporter. You asked the right question, a fundamental question about his deepest beliefs about the Constitution. And he gave initially an honest answer, then he dodged, of course.
Yeah.
Then what did he do? He completely hid it from the press, the First Amendment. And he won, apparently, tonight. So is that a message to the Tea Partiers, to Sharon Angle and the whole rest of them? If you want to get elected, don't talk, don't answer questions.
They already got that message. That's why Sharon Angle spent a year running away from reporters. They know that talking to reporters is the worst thing they can do. We simply saw him, Rand Paul, become more of a politician every day. He now has a very big problem named Mitch McConnell. Howard's reporting on how helpful McConnell was to Paul getting elected in Kentucky is vital to Paul being a senator. But Rand Paul has said today about McConnell, we will challenge him day to day. That means the Tea Party in the Senate will challenge the establishment Republican Party.
So is that money protection money? How would you term that?
Well, we're going to see what kind of a politician Rand Paul is. He's going to try to please the people who want him to challenge Mitch McConnell every day, and in the back room, whispering to Mitch McConnell, he's going to be saying, I'm really with you every day.
So he's actually the same politician that's been elected for the last 150, 200 years.
Well, probably. I mean, my question is he going to do what he did on Rachel's show? Essentially, have these beliefs but not actually act on them or say them out loud, or will he, now that he's elected, take advantage of the prerogatives of a single senator who can gum up the whole works and who can do a lot and be a genuine Tea Partier in the U.S. Senate.
You look at the number of votes in the United States House that are 400, 300, whatever, to Ron Paul, where Ron Paul is the one person in the House who is voting no. He'll vote no on naming post offices. He'll vote no on I Like Pie Day. He'll vote no on anything because he believes in being a contrarian U.S. member of the U.S. House. Is Rand Paul going to follow his father's footsteps? If you do that in the Senate, you actually don't get I Like Pie Day. You can stop
exactly.
it for
you
the
can stop
country.
Pie Day.
You can stop anything, and you're right. The question is whether or not he will be the guy he campaigned to be in the primary, or whether he'll be the politician he campaigned as in the general.
Let me bring Ed Schultz into this from Vegas on this pressing issue of Pie Day, and and I guess Aqua Buddha be praised, Ed.
Well, you know, Keith, I think this is the first real shot over the bow at the Obama administration. This is going to put the Obama administration on the defensive early on in the next session of the Congress. I mean, if you have got Mitch McConnell telling Rand Paul that there's going to be an early vote on health care reform, now the president, we're going to find out just how much he loves this reform, and we're going to find out how much his base loves this reform, because there's no way that the president's going to be able to fence this off in the Congress without the liberal base coming out saying, you know what, it's not the bill we wanted, but we're going to fight for this. So I think this is a very interesting development, and Rand Paul is up by, what, 10 percentage points. In today's arena of close elections, he's going to run away with this thing. So I think this is a real message to the White House. Okay, you're going to either be on the offense or the defense, and it's going to be interesting to see how the White House plays this. And I don't see how they're going to be able to defend their health care bill unless they get all Democrats on board.
I think it's important also to note what's just happened with Indiana. The Republicans have their first Senate pickup in Indiana. Evan Bayh, probably the only Democrat that could have held that Indiana Senate seat right now. Evan Bayh knew that. Resigned anyway, decided not to run again, held on to all his campaign money, and did not give any of that campaign money to any other Democrats in order for them to try to win their seats, and is now essentially reinventing himself as a pundit who talks smack about Democrats and how badly how bad they are as a party, and how that's seen in the seats that they lose, one of which he gave away. So, I mean, the Democrats are going to miss Evan Bayh's Senate seat in Indiana. I cannot believe they're going to miss Evan Bayh.
But that campaign money is usable in any federal election.
If he gets there on the backs of trashing every other Democrat who's ever done anything for him. Evan Bayh, 2 terms in the Senate, he inherited that Senate seat essentially from his dad, has no legislative record to show for his time there, but has made himself a national figure who has only accomplished being the Democrat who trashes the Democratic Party and makes sure they have fewer seats than if he didn't exist. It's unbelievable.
Let me bring it back to Kentucky, because before the hour, before the call that Rand Paul had won in Kentucky, which we have projected here based on the poll closing at 7 o'clock, Howard Fineman was talking about this meeting of what are now Kentucky's senator and Kentucky's senator-elect. And is it, Howard, is it meeting of the minds, meeting of the wallets? What happened here? Expand a little about, recap what you told us before and expand a little bit, please.
Well, initially, Mitch McConnell opposed Rand Paul. He wanted a more establishment Republican figure to win the primary in the state. Rand Paul won, and Mitch McConnell, being the pragmatic politician that he is, set about the business of currying favor with Rand Paul. That was almost the entire direction of the transaction. And today I spoke to people from both the McConnell camp and the Paul camp, and what struck me was that the Paul people were saying, gee, Mitch McConnell really came in our direction. He helped us out. He tied us into the National Republican Contributors. He did fundraisers for us. He helped us on the issues. And gee, isn't that great? But then I asked, is Rand Paul going to endorse Mitch McConnell to be Republican leader? And basically the answer was, well, yeah, but that's probably because there isn't going to be anybody else running for Republican leader. So it wasn't really a full-throated endorsement. So Rand Paul, who a few months ago, a few years or so ago, wasn't in politics at all, is arguably going to be the pivotal guy in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell is going to be spending half of his time, if not more, in continuing diplomatic negotiations with Rand Paul, because there are going to be 14 or 15 he hated is now going to have to be his ambassador. And that's going to be a fascinating dynamic to watch from minute to minute in the Senate.
But he's used to dealing with Jim Bunning, so is this better or worse? Bunning was the great baseball pitcher for the Phillies and other teams, and he would do things like use his power to filibuster to kill popular programs like unemployment comp to the detriment of the Republican Party, probably the way he did it.
Well, I think there's two things here. First of all, if Rand Paul is exactly like Ron Paul,
yes,
then McConnell's going to go crazy trying to deal with him. But if Rand Paul is the Rand Paul he's been the last few months, that is trimming his sails, as Rachel was talking about, taking the money and the national help, coming up to Washington to get the laying on of hands from the establishment and so forth, it's going to be a very interesting story to watch. And I think he's obviously going to be a little bit of both. Now, it is true that, from talking to McConnell people, there is going to be a vote on repealing health care. But if you look at the contract from America, you know, the Tea Party thing here, They did a vote. The Contract from America people did a vote on which were the most popular features of this agenda. And repealing health care was not at the top of them. It's all about limited government, balanced budget amendment, tax cuts and so forth. Repeal and replacement of health care is only number 7 and only had about 56% support from the Tea Party people themselves. But McConnell had to promise that, I think, in order to get Rand Paul on board.
I just want to point something out to Senator-elect Paul. Mitch McConnell cannot promise you anything. He is the minority leader of the United States Senate. Unless the Republicans win the majority, he cannot bring anything to a vote in the United States Senate. And you may have noticed last year, even the majority leader cannot bring anything he wants to a vote whenever he wants to bring something to a vote. There will not be a vote in the United States Senate on repealing health care reform. It will not happen.
Okay, we'll make a bet on that, Lawrence. I bet there is such a vote.
It will never come to a vote. There will be an attempt.
Okay,
there'll be an attempt, and it will not make it to a vote.
Well, that's okay.
All right. Well, we got that out of the way. So we got the early votes and non-votes set in the Senate. We have 2 senators in the important uncertain states going in Indiana and Kentucky. That's concluded. Let's look again at some of the bellwether House races that are beginning to, or will begin to get into focus in the next hour and a half. Chuck Todd again covering tonight's elections by the numbers. Chuck?
Hello there, Keith. Well, as you mentioned with the Senate, I just want to make one other point about what we're watching in the Senate, and that is in 18 minutes, polls close in West Virginia, and that really is going to set the tone about whether there's a realistic chance for Republicans to get 10 or not. But let me go to obviously the other big story we're following tonight, and that is whether Republicans can win the House. There's so many people predicting that they are going to. They need 39 seats. But here's why all these analysts seem to be predicting it. There's 2 other numbers I want people to focus on, 49 and 51. There are 49 Democratic districts that John McCain carried in 2008. You can see there, that's 10 more than the 39 that they can get. I will bet you if they pull this off, they will do it with a lion's share of those 49. And then whether there's a wave, that comes from the 51 down here. These are 51 Democrats sitting in districts carried by President Obama in 2008. But these are Democrats that voted for both for health care and for the climate energy bill that Republicans call cap and trade. And that is obviously something that they've been hammered on. I want to bring up one other race, though. Hey, by the way, in these early poll closings, Keith, 18 of these 100 races that we're tracking, 18 of them fall within Indiana, South Carolina, Virginia, and in Kentucky, these early races we're going to call. But I want to show you one race because this is going to tell us something about whether there was an odd strategy that the Democrats had late in here, and it's best represented in the 5th district of Virginia here. And obviously we're seeing our technology have a hiccup here. There it is. Okay, it's there. And it's a two-way race, basically. Either Tom Perriello or Robert Hurt's going to win. But guess what? There is a third candidate here, a conservative challenger that the Democrat, Tom Perriello, was hoping would take votes away from Robert Hurt. There are a lot of races like this tonight, guys, where the Democrat's going to get less than 50% and might win. It's going to happen in Senate races potentially out in Nevada. That's Harry Reid's path to victory. And if Democrats can get a dozen or more Tom Perriellos to pull this off and do this, very early numbers coming out of there. We don't have much to tell you. But if they pull this off, That's how they would hang on to control of Congress, because they would be able to split this conservative vote away from some of these actual Republican nominees, guys.
Perriello and Hurt facing a Mr. not appearing in your picture there.
Yes.
Thank you, Chuck. Chuck Todd by the numbers. We'll have some more numbers for you again as the polls begin to close in West Virginia, Ohio, North Carolina. That's at 7:30 Eastern, bottom of the hour. When we return, the latest from the exit polling from Indiana, the first Republican Senate pickup of the night, the first result of the night, in fact. Plus, DNC Chair Tim Kaine will join us. MSNBC's midterm election coverage continues after this. North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia will close, as you see, in 11 minutes and change. It doesn't look like a big group at 7:30, but 13 of our 136 bellwethers in the House races are included in those 3 states. We've got new information from our exit polling. Let's go to Lester Holt with the voice of the voter. And Lester, you got stuff on Indiana and the nationwide reaction to the Tea Party?
Yeah, well, at least the Indiana reaction to the Tea Party. We want to get a closer look at Indiana. You reported for the Republicans. They gained a seat there with Republican Dan Coates defeating Democrat Brad Ellsworth. Turns out Tea Party sentiment played a big role in this race. And I had to take a double take at these numbers, Keith. Almost half the voters in Indiana say they support the Tea Party movement. Half. That's a huge number. Just 27% there opposed. The Republican candidate, Dan Coates, won 85% of the Tea Party supporters. The Democrat got just 11% of them. And there's more. Remember just 2 years ago, Barack Obama won Indiana. Tonight, nearly half the voters said they were casting their ballot to show they opposed the president. Just a quarter said their vote was to show support. Now, we don't always associate social conservatives with the Tea Party movement, but they made up a very big percentage of the voters in Indiana today. 43% called themselves conservative, 41% were white evangelical Christians, and 54% say they were opposed to abortion. Indiana, again, a state that went for Obama in 2008, swinging back to a red state tonight. A pretty fascinating development, Keith.
Indeed, and it'll be fascinating, too, Lester, to see how that plays out when we start getting those Indiana House results. There are 3 key ones there in the 2nd, the 8th, and 9th, including the Barron Hills seat, when we start calling those races. There weren't exit polling done specifically on those races, but again, Lester Holt with the voice of the voter inside the exit polls. Thank you kindly, Lester. The former Virginia Governor, Tim Kaine, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and joining us now. All right, so you're down 1 in the Senate. That one has been called, and Rand Paul is going to replace Jim Bunning in Kentucky. Give us your early perspective on the state of play for the Democrats on midterm eve, or midterm night, I should say, Tim.
You bet, Keith. Well, let's just start with the Senate. I think an interesting and telling one is going to be West Virginia. If the West Virginia polls, which close in a few minutes, if we get a report back that Joe Manchin has won that seat, it is very, very difficult for the Republicans to get control of the Senate. Even if they do, they still have to pretty much run the table. So that's one we're watching very closely. We don't take any race for granted, but a few months ago they felt like they would take the Senate back. We think we're going to be in good shape in the Senate. The House is where an awful lot of the attention is being paid right now. You've got polls that have just closed and polls closing soon where we'll start to know an awful lot more. But there's still a lot of voting to be done all across the country. I know folks are watching as far west as Hawaii, and I'm just encouraging you. There are going to be razor-thin races all the way to Hawaii, so please make sure you turn out and vote.
Governor, what do you think the president should say tomorrow? I mean, you're watching this. You must have talked to the other Democratic leaders. You must have given it some thought in the past weeks. Yep. What is the right course correction, if there is one?
Well, Chris, I think maybe to begin with, what is in fact the correction? The president and all Democrats, we were obviously, euphoric at the election in January 2009 at Inauguration Day, but even in that moment of maximum optimism, we knew that America wasn't a 59-41 nation. The margin in both House and Senate essentially was 59% Dem, 41% R. That's not what the electorate is. We are a closely divided electorate. That hasn't changed. One way to look at this election is just basically a reset back to where these margins are going to narrow by whatever the numbers. It's going to be a reset back to near where the American population is, and that means that
well, you're saying it's a center-right country, but based upon these returns, I mean, a lot of people have been saying in this country it's deep down a center-right. I'm not sure I agree with that at all, but I'm asking you, what do you think it is, the natural setting of the American people? Is it right dead center? Is it a bit to the left? Where would you put America in terms of what it wants from government?
I think it's pretty much dead center. I don't think it's center right, and you're going to have basically, you know, three moving pieces here in the Capitol: a White House that's Democratic, a Senate that we believe will be Democratic. And while I still think there are scenarios where the Dems can hold on to the House, and maybe we can talk about that in a sec, you know, Republicans' best case scenario, they have one of the three pieces. That means that the Democrats would have two of the three, but basically the margins are narrower, and that just means that what the president, I'm sure, will say is, look, that makes it even more imperative going forward that we work together. We've made great progress. There's more progress to make, and we're only going to make it if we work together.
Look, a lot of people are interested in politics not because they like the game, but because they like the results. They want they want climate dealt with. They want immigration dealt with. Can you deal with these issues in a responsible way with a country that you think the true north is right dead center, with a president who's a moderate progressive? I mean, can you do it? Can it work henceforth?
And Chris, as you might imagine, what I'm going to say is, you know, each issue kind of stands on its own. Some are easier than others. So, for example, let's talk about one that's very, very important to Democrats: is comprehensive immigration reform. You know, you had a vote on the DREAM Act a month and a half ago. 56 Senate Democrats voted yes. No Republican voted yes. But just 3 years ago on comprehensive immigration reform, there were 11 Senate Republicans who were willing to vote yes for a package put forward by then President Bush. All we need is, you know, 1/4 of those or 1/2 of those willing to go along, and we can find a solution to a very, very important issue, dealing with issues about deficit and spending. The Republicans say that matters to them. Now, they voted to block the president's bipartisan deficit commission, but going forward, there's going to be opportunity to talk about those issues. I think the climate energy issues, they're tough. We did the first half of it, the incentivizing of a new green energy economy through the stimulus bill that is really pushing that forward. How you deal with the disincentivizing of carbon to control climate, that's going to be tough, and we're going to have to look at what the margin is in the Senate and then figure that out, but it needs to be done.
Governor, before we let you go, what is that House scenario? We can't let you go without telling that.
So over on the House scenario, you know, I know the R's are dancing before they're in the end zone, but look, here's the House scenario for Dems, and it's one that we're paying close attention to. The Dems are going to lose seats, and they're going to lose in Delaware. We've got 2 competitive races we can win in Florida. We've got a seat in Louisiana. We should win a seat in Hawaii. We should win a seat in the northern Chicago suburbs in Illinois. We got a great chance of winning. And 3 or 4 others that I think we got a good shot. So you take 4 to 8 seats Republican going over to the Democratic side. That is the scenario that we've been paying attention to. We saw good early voting trends, no enthusiasm gap in the early voting, and some of the turnout that we're seeing in a number of our key races is not showing the enthusiasm gap that a lot of people were predicting.
So do you have a number?
My number is, the other guys say they're going to take both houses. I say we're holding on to both houses, and I'll definitely feel very good if we do.
Governor Tim Kaine, the DNC chairman. That wasn't a number, but we'll accept your answer. Thank you kindly.
All right. Thanks, Keith.
All right. In a moment, we're going to have the first results from that West Virginia Senate race between Joe Manchin, the governor, and John Racy, plus early results from Ohio and North Carolina as those 7:30 closing times hit. MSNBC's midterm election coverage 2010 will continue from New York and elsewhere after this. Indeed, the 7:30 Eastern Time poll closings, as represented by the wonderful map of North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia, 5 seconds hence. And we have some information, at least, if not necessarily calls, from the 3 key races there in the Senate in each of them. And starting in West Virginia, it is too early to call between Governor Joe Manchin and the Republican and Tea Party candidate John Racy. We are, again, too early to call. Ohio, not the case. To replace the retiring Senator Voinovich, NBC News projects Rob Portman, the former Bush budget director, will in fact take that seat and retain it for the Republicans. The North Carolina Senate race, Mr. Burr seeking another term in office there. This one is also too early to call, but Mr. Burr leads in that case. And from 7 o'clock still considered too early to close at the 7 o'clock, too early to call rather, from the 7 o'clock close between Senator Isaacson and the Democratic challenger Michael Thurmond. So still half an hour into poll closing time, time. The pickup in the Senate is one. We could call this the swing, I suppose, as Indiana goes back to the Republicans via Mr. Coates taking over from Mr. Bayh. And that then is the picture of the Senate with the remaining seats not represented, the ones still available in our night of 37 different Senate elections around the nation. Of particular interest among the many governor's races, also 37 in number, too close to call in Ohio, not too early, but too close, between the incumbent governor, Ted Strickland, the Democrat, and the Republican and Fox News challenger, John Kasich. Well, he had a show on Fox News. Let's call it what it is. If you ran for well, no, that's a bad example, but we'd be saying MSNBC.
Can I just, I think the electorate is so interesting to watch, and some states are fascinating. New York's a liberal state. You know, it tends to elect Democratic senators. Iowa and Ohio are fascinating to watch. Iowa has Harkin and has Grassley. You figure. Ohio has done it again. They've got Sherrod Brown, who's sort of an Ed Schultz Democrat. Labor, strong for labor, free trade, very questionable about global baloney and all that stuff. And now they've got Rob Portman, Mr. Free Trade, Mr. Bush, a total Bush holdover, a total free trader, and they've got both of them. What's it average out to? What is the statement coming out of Ohio?
The statement is, as in most voting, lesser of two evils. It is always a mistake to presume that a vote is cast for the entire platform of a particular party when cast for
Sherrod Brown stands for something so strong, so visceral. I don't trust trade. I'm for the working guy, the working stiff. I don't trust the big corporations. And along comes Rob Portman.
Well, this would be one reason why Ohio is a swing state, and it's always at issue in the presidential race.
What do you think in Ohio?
All right, one thing, not to make it, if I didn't make it clear before, in West Virginia, we are saying that Joe Manchin is ahead there, although that one remains too early to call, the Senate race with Manchin and Racy. Chris just mentioned an Ed Schultz kind of Democrat. We have an even stronger example of an Ed Schultz Democrat, Ed Schultz, who joins us again from Las Vegas. The West Virginia race, this was looked at. I mean, there's not a bellwether in the Senate. It's a manageable number. It's not 435 seats. Tell me about what this indication for you at this point that Manchin is ahead with less than 1% reporting.
Well, Manchin is not a lefty. And Manchin ran a very calculated campaign. He did an ad with a gun. He went out in the woods. He talked about, right to bear arms. He played right to the heart and soul of those folks that live in the mountains in West Virginia and actually ran away from President Obama's agenda. And he's a West Virginia guy. He's a governor. They trust him. He went through a traumatic loss of life with that mining disaster. He connected emotionally with the people in West Virginia. And his opponent has been somewhat out of the fraternal order of Sharon Angle when it comes to making goofy comments. So I'm not really surprised that Joe Manchin is doing as well as he's doing. Getting back to Ohio, Keith and Chris, I just got off the phone with Sherrod Brown. They are very encouraged about what they're hearing in Ohio right now. Strickland, they're very confident. And this is a huge pickup if they do win the governor's chair, because for the first time in 20 years, they would be controlling the redistricting board in the state of Ohio, which consists of the auditor, which is going to be a Democrat, and the Secretary of State, which is going to be a Republican. If Strickland wins this means that the Republican state Senate is not going to be able to run roughshod over the Democrats when it comes to congressional redistricting. And so they need Strickland to win big time, which of course will play very big in 2012 for Barack Obama. I mean, the country knows when there's a presidential election, it's Ohio, it's Florida, it's California. Right. So they're very encouraged about what's going on in Ohio right now, and they want this redistricting board to go their way for the first time in 20 years.
What would happen if Fox got control of redistricting in Ohio, Ed?
Well, I would have to go to Ohio and run for something. But, it was, I think it's very fair to say, I'm not convinced that John Kasich would be as popular as he is had he not had that Fox show. But the fact that Portman is in great shape there in Ohio. The fact that Strickland feels very good at this hour shows that it's a mixed bag. And I think it also shows that it's going to be a real toss-up in 2012. And that's why making sure that the Republican state Senate in Ohio can't come in and strong-arm and redistrict and draw the lines to favor the Republicans. This is, again, as we say during the presidential, but now in the midterm, it's Ohio.
If you're sitting in the White House, Ed is singing music to you right now, because I've been watching this now for wherever they asked President Clinton to go, where they focused all their apples to try to hold their last redoubts. Florida, with Alex Sink. They're hoping like heck she can win tonight. They're hoping they can hold that seat in Strickland, and they're really hoping for some help in Colorado. Those three states have been sort of like the last redoubt, if you will, if you're in the Alamo situation they're in tonight, which is to try to hold the basic fort, the mission.
Well, and what did the Democratic candidate against Mr. Portman do last week? Lieutenant Governor Fisher essentially said, I'm not going to win this thing. Here are the funds.
Yeah.
You know,
the opposite of Evan Bayh.
The opposite of Evan Bayh. One could discuss what happened in Florida as a contrast. Is there something with Evan Bayh?
No, I just think, actually, something with Indiana. I think Indiana is fascinating. You look at those exit poll results out of Indiana were fascinating. 45% of people saying they identify with the Tea Party. And who did they elect? They elected Dan Coates. Dan Coates, 30 years in Washington as a staffer, 8 years as a congressman, 10 years as a senator, then a corporate lobbyist for 5 years. And so this whole we're going to take our country back, if you're not going to take it back from Dan Coates, who are you going to take it back from?
In Washington, he lived in the suburbs. So he was an outsider.
But similarly, with Rob Portman with this race in Ohio, 6 terms in the House, 2 cabinet-level positions under George W. Bush, the top recipient of corporate money from insurance industries and commercial banks this year. And it's going to be represented as some sort of Tea Party victory. If this is what the Tea Party stands for, then we need to redefine populism in this country.
Rachel, banks and corporations are people too. The Supreme Court has made that clear.
Citizens United taught us.
53% of Indiana voters said they were voting to express their opposition to Barack Obama. The way you do that is in the Republican slot of a two-party election. So Coates could have been anybody.
Coates could, but 45% affiliation with the Tea Party, and then they pick the corporate lobbyist, ex-senator, ex-congressman, ex-congressional staffer.
You want consistency?
It's just all of this right-wing populism, more outsiders. We want fresh faces in Washington. I'm done with it.
But that's how co-opted the Tea Party was, pretty much instantaneously by Dick Armey and other Washington lobbyist Republican interests.
That is the summation of the argument can be answered in the words Dick Armey.
Yeah.
It's not a grassroots. It may have elements of grassroots, and in individual races it may be extraordinary grassroots. Rand Paul, that is an expression, at least the process by which he got into the Senate tonight, or will, according to.
If your name was Richard Armey and you were growing up, would you say, "Call me Dick"?
Rand Paul.
Moving along.
All right, no, I already exceeded my number of jokes in that regard. March 1st of this year. But Rand Paul is the reverse of this. So, the consistency is, to your point, there is none.
Can I just defend Indiana? Indiana is a very peculiar state. For years, they had a couple of rules then. All the Democrats, even the more moderate, reasonable Democrats, smart Democrats like Lee Hamilton, all had to vote for the balanced budget amendment, even though it was a joke, that constitutional amendment. Every year they had to go through the procedure of doing that. They had another rule. Everybody had to drive an American car. It is a very interesting state, and I think that you have certainly a philosophical concern about the voting patterns of Evan Bayh. He may be too conservative for a Democrat, but the fact is he's worried. He's worried. I think he was definitely worried about the cultural consequences of being a Democrat in Indiana, and we're seeing tonight what they're facing out there. It's a conservative state.
Himself by bad-mouthing Democrats every time he gets anywhere.
And I also think he wants to run for governor at some point.
Yeah, good luck, Evan.
Well, not with your support. I think you might be doing some college tours out there, but just a guess.
Good luck.
You know, I think that's what I think we're zeroing in on a guy who is very worried about being a national Democrat.
When we return, our special guest, Evan Bayh of Indiana. I made that up. I'm sorry. An incumbent senator locked in another tight race. Colorado's Michael Bennet joins us. Stand by. As we've been telling you, Rand Paul, the projected winner in the Senate race in Kentucky. That one coming in early in the night. For more, and there is the actual count to this point, with nearly a third of the vote in, a 6% plurality for Mr. Paul. It's by a margin of about 27,000 plus votes over the Attorney General of Kentucky, Jack Conway. That one already called by NBC News for Rand Paul. And for more on what it means, this victory, not necessarily to Kentucky, but to Karl Rove. We're joined by NBC News investigative reporter Michael Isikoff. Michael, good evening.
Good evening, Keith. You're right. This is actually the first big victory for that network of Republican groups spearheaded by Karl Rove that have been pouring millions of dollars into this election. If you look at the figures in that Kentucky race, the outside Republican spending on behalf of Paul attacking Jack Conway, the Democrat, was about $5.7 million. That's way more, $3 million more than the Democratic spending on behalf of Conway and attacking Paul. Who was spearheading that outpouring on behalf of Paul? American Crossroads, that group founded by Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie, another former Bush White House aide, and its sister affiliate, Crossroads GPS. What's significant about that one, Crossroads GPS, which was pouring a lot of money into direct mailing, is its undisclosed donors. Big contributors who did not have to reveal themselves, were not made public because of that Supreme Court ruling. Also a big player in this race, the Chamber of Commerce, which spent about $1.2 million attacking Conway on behalf of Paul. So one of the big stories of this election, Keith, is going to be this outside spending. People are going to be looking at this. We'll be looking at this over the night. But this is the first big test, and it shows that, at least in this case, it's working.
All you need is cash, as the spoof of the Beatles once suggested. This dovetails into something, Michael, that Senator Menendez said early in our night, and looking ahead to that, as he put it, $64 million in corporate spending just against Senate Democrats alone. How the Democrats intend to respond to this, and the possibility of changing the filibuster rules in the Senate so they can get the Disclose Act passed. Is that the main Democratic response to this?
Well, yeah, but that's going to be a tough haul if the Republicans have the big victory that they're looking for tonight, because, look, they'll in part owe their victory to this secret spending, to the large cash that's being spent out there, and it's hard to imagine a Republican-dominated Congress is going to look favorably on a proposal that would undercut its ability to do the same thing in 2 years from now.
Michael,
but there is a way around this. The Vice President of the United States could declare. Lawrence, check me on this. You know the rules of the Senate. Couldn't the Vice President declare that the Senate's a new body every 2 years? It's a new body. It's not a continuing body. And have an up or down vote on the rules. And do it by simple majority vote. Nixon tried to do it after being reelected vice president. The Democratic liberals decided to back the Democratic Dixiecrats then, so it couldn't work. But if you could get a majority of either, if you could get 51 senators to join the vice president and say, we're going to establish new rules because it's a new body, and what would happen? Would the chair, would the parliamentarians rule against that and say it's a continuing body?
No one's really sure, but your problem is, in a situation like that, getting 51 votes.
Why wouldn't they do it?
Because that's when people start to pretend there's such a thing as a Democrat or a Republican Party that thinks unanimously on these subjects in the Senate. Yeah. Remember, there are going to be marginal Democrats, marginal Republicans, many more marginal Democrats. Evan Bayh type Democrats who will worry. What do you think Ben Nelson does on that?
I'm just wondering. I know they're institutionalists too who don't like the idea of going down to majority vote.
And
but
remember,
if you want to change it, you got to do it.
They are looking at these exit polls that are reporting very negatively on the conduct of the last Congress, which included using a reconciliation device in a way we had never seen it used before, which was to say to use half of a piece of legislation legislated one way and then legislate the other half through reconciliation. We've never done that before. It smelled messy. You could explain it all day parliamentarily. This thing would have that same
But the parliamentarians backed him. That's how the president got the health care bill through.
Exactly.
While we're reforming
and there's no appeal of a parliament.
It's just interesting because, what Rachel says we talk about all the time, and we might as well talk about the way to fix the problem. If you have a problem with the 60-vote rule, you got to find a way to deal with it. And you can't keep saying, when we get 2/3 of the Senate, we'll do it. You're never going to get 67 votes.
If there are 49 Democrats Democrats, they're going to love the 60-vote rule.
Before we get to reforming the Senate, I'd like to talk to a senator.
Point.
We're joined now from Colorado by Senator Michael Bennet, seeking election tonight. Senator, thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
How do you think things stand from your perspective? Your polls obviously don't close for another hour and 10 minutes, but give us what you know.
Well, this is, I think, the tightest race in the country. We are extremely happy to be where we are, and I believe we're winning this the old-fashioned way with door knocks and telephone calls. And if there's anybody watching this show in Colorado that hasn't voted, get out and vote. You got an hour and 15 minutes left, and we need every single vote.
Are you confident it's going to be decided tonight, or is this one of these races that may be recounted, may be litigated at some point?
I don't have any idea. Obviously, we'd prefer to win tonight, but we're just going to have to see how it goes. I've got my wife and my 3 little girls upstairs, and we'll hang out until it's done.
Let me ask you a simple question. Imagine you're a Democrat in Colorado and you're sitting at home and you haven't voted. What's the number one single isolated reason, not a bunch of stuff and a sundry list, one reason why you should get out of the house, don't have that second beer, go over there and vote before you have supper tonight?
I would say the number one reason is that the guy I'm running against wants to take us back to exactly the same policies that put us in the ditch to begin with a bunch of additional bells and whistles that are way outside the mainstream of where we are as Coloradans. And I want to work to take the country forward, working with Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated voters. It doesn't matter to me. And that's really the distinction in this race. So get out and vote.
Who's your hero?
My hero, Abraham Lincoln.
Well, that's safe. Back to you, Keith. I can't. That's a.
It seems appropriate for the events of the last several months.
Hope he's not talking about Civil War. There you go.
Tell me about the last several months. I mean, it's a great point to make, and it's a great intriguing why Lincoln would be invoked over the last several months.
I actually think that, and I've seen the polling some of you guys have put up tonight, and I know this is going to be a close race. And I actually have not taken the lesson from this that our state is nearly as divided as the polls suggest, or as the other polls suggest. My sense, very, very strong sense, having had probably more town hall meetings than anyone in the Senate, red parts of the state and blue parts of the state, is that actually our values endure, our aspirations are shared. They just think politics is off topic. And with respect, they think the conversations they hear on a lot of the cable are off topic as well. They are struggling through the worst economy since the Great Depression. You saw that number from Colorado saying 70% of Coloradans believe that the economy is actually in a serious secular decline. And the point, what we have to do is give people hope that we're going to innovate again in the 21st century, and that our educational system is going to support our small businesses, entrepreneurs, and innovators to do that, that we're going to break our reliance on foreign oil, and we're going to educate our kids. That, I think, is what they're looking for, and that used to be called leadership.
Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado, thank you kindly for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me on the show.
At the top of the hour, the first results, something untoward happened at the end there, from some of the big Senate races we're watching in Pennsylvania, Florida, Illinois, and Connecticut. The biggest hour of closing time of the night. Our coverage continues after this. Let's go back to Las Vegas and Ed Schultz of MSNBC. Ed, we just had Senator Bennet on the air talking about his hero Lincoln and the last few months. He didn't get into some of the things that Ken Buck has proposed in Colorado, including harkening back to the great American school systems of the 1950s, when half of all white students didn't graduate, and I think the total of African-American students was 1 in 5 who graduated. It's an extraordinary, it is a kind of a bellwether Senate race.
Well, it really is, and this was one of the hot topics in their most recent debate, Keith, was public education. And Michael Bennet, who comes from education, has never run for anything. That's part of his appeal. He's kind of a clean gene. He's not Washingtonized, and he's never won an election before, and here he is in this. He was appointed to the United States Senate. But in that debate, It was Bennett taking it to Buck on some radical comments that he had made about public education. There's one other facet. There's one other facet to this, and this is the Andrew Romanoff crowd. After the primary, they have really come out and supported Michael Bennett, which was crucial if they were going to defeat Ken Buck.
And the symbolism of that still being, we presume, a tight race. We don't have exit polling on it.
Well, it's going to be a tight race, but I can tell you that they're very passionate out in Colorado. I did 3 town hall meetings out there in the last 16 months, and also Amendment 62 has been a big draw for the conservatives to come out and vote. So Bennett's got his work cut out, but I think he's going to be in good shape.
Ed Schultz, thank you. The 8 p.m. closing time coming up. Alabama, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee next here on MSNBC. A few seconds before 8 o'clock Eastern time, the polls closing at this hour in 15 more states. The results are going to come to you hot and heavy starting moments from now with the Florida Senate race, which NBC News can now project will go to the Republican and Tea Party candidate Marco Rubio. In a tight 3-way race, there's your projected winner, Mr. Rubio, who was leading in most of the late polls. Much discussion in the last weeks of this race, whether or not the Democrat Kendrick Meek would drop out and perhaps endorse the independent Charlie Crist. That now looking with those percentages, again, those are early percentages at about a third in, that looking to be something of an academic issue as Mr. Crist and Mr. Meek long behind Mr. Rubio there. To New Hampshire, the Senate race there, and Kelly Ayotte, also Palin, Tea Party, defeating the Congressman Paul Hodes in our NBC projections. That's New Hampshire. Delaware in a very prominent, but perhaps not a very close race. We don't have the hard numbers on it yet. The Democrat Chris Coons vaulted into a major lead after the upset by the Tea Party candidate Ms. O'Donnell, has now projected as the NBC News winner in Delaware. In Maryland, no surprise, Senator Mikulski, the incumbent Democrat, to be returned, according to our NBC News projections. The same for Alabama and the Republican Richard Shelby, who will return as the graphic pops up there. He is our projected winner in Alabama. In Oklahoma, again, also no surprise, as the Republican Dr. Tom Coburn will return to the Oklahoma Senate seat that he has held previously. Pennsylvania, too close to call at this hour. Not too early, but too close between Representative Sestak and Mr. Toomey in what has been a hammer and tongs race all along for a year. Illinois, too close to call as well in the Senate race between Mr. Janulius and Mark Kirk. Missouri, a different consideration. Too early to call, meaning we simply have not enough information between Mr. Carnahan and Mr. Blunt. Connecticut is too early to call, but this caveat, we can tell you that the Democrat, the Attorney General of the state, Mr. Blumenthal, is leading in that race, but it is too early to call it over the businesswoman Linda McMahon. West Virginia, too early to call. No characterization of that one other than Mr. Manchin is ahead, and as you see, with less than 2% in, he's ahead statistically as well. North Carolina, too early to call between the incumbent Senator Burr and Ms. Marshall. And in Georgia, that one is also still too early to call, although the incumbent Senator Isaacson has a big lead with 3% or so in. So the pickups remain that one in Indiana, where the Rachel Maddow Memorial Evan Bayh seat is going to Mr. Coates of Indiana, and that makes the Senate look at this hour a 41-31 with 2 independents, and of course 37 in total up for grabs tonight. Again, a lot of information. One more here. Florida's governor's race, too close to call between the Democrat Alex Sink and Rick Scott, the Republican who sank so much money into that race, who is leading at this point with 30% of the vote in. Too early to call in Massachusetts with the governor, the incumbent Deval Patrick, the close friend of the president, and Charlie Baker, the Republican. Too early to call in Massachusetts. More information even than I thought we were going to present to you. All right.
Yeah, and there's a pattern there, and it's going on so long this year that we shouldn't lose sight of it. The death of the moderate wing of the Republican Party, especially in the East Coast of the United States. Charlie Crist was a pretty successful governor down there. He did a great job in terms of the oil spill. Everyone said he was the one politician down there who really knew how to handle it. He went immediately for the offshore ban, immediately took charge of the situation in terms of protecting his shorelines. blown away by the right wing, by Rubio. He couldn't even run in his own party eventually. Mike Castle getting knocked out by the woman who said she's not a witch. I mean, this is a joke. It's a joke for the Republican Party to lose people like Mike Castle. Arlen Specter, maybe he was past his time, his sell-by date, but the fact is he was blown out of the race by Toomey. So what you see is all these people, like I grew up in the suburbs, actually very inner suburbs of Philadelphia, where you're used to the fact you always had a choice between a liberal Democrat and a moderate Republican. You could choose an Eisenhower Republican who was a pretty moderate Republican, like Scranton and all those guys, Ridge. They're all blown away. They're all gone. So the moderate person, the Michael Smerconish, if you will, has no more options anymore. He must now choose between a polarized political system, left and right. And I think some people like it, some people don't. I think it's different. It may not be better.
But who's going? I'm with you on the right. I'm not sure that's true on the left. I think that there's plenty of moderate Democrats still out there. I don't think we're going to see some blue dogs picked off tonight. But you're not having the same purification process happen on the left as you are on the right.
It's a purge. Call it what it is.
A purge on the right, but the same thing is not happening on the left. And so, I mean, maybe...
Well, where are the conservative, moderate or conservative Democrats?
The conservative...
On the East Coast.
Well, are we only talking about the East Coast?
No,
Or are we talking about the Ben Nelsons, the Mary Landrieux? I mean, those people in the party are not necessarily... Those people are not necessarily going anywhere. Had Evan Bayh stayed in the race, hate to keep bringing him up, he probably would have won this race. There's the Republicans are the ones who are purging from the edge. The Democrats are not doing the same thing.
And if Joe Manchin wins, he would be another example.
Joe Manchin winning by shooting literally, shooting literally Democratic legislation.
You invoked Evan Bayh. Howard Feynman at the Listening Post talked to Evan Bayh on this very topic, correct, Howard?
Yeah, I just talked to him a few minutes ago. He didn't see the earlier part of the show, but...
Is he watching now? Should we warn Rachel?
He might be watching now, but I think his point basically, and leave aside all the other stuff about him personally and so forth, is just he felt, I think I'm summarizing accurately, that he had told Barack Obama, the president, that going for the whole health care bill and some of the other things he went for were going to antagonize a lot of the moderate Democratic voters in places like Indiana, where he, Evan Bayh, had spent years cultivating them. And, you know, that's his point. Now, I think he's writing an op-ed page for the New York Times about this, and, you know, he feels strongly about it and said that it was only by pursuing the moderate path that what he calls the moderate path that he pursued, that he was able to be governor of Indiana from '88 to '96, that he was able to get elected to the Senate, and you know, he had had enough of politics, but he wanted to leave that message behind, and I think I think Rachel's right. There is no purge mentality in the Democratic Party. But at least from Bayh's point of view, he felt that the president wasn't listening to his advice, so that was time for him to leave.
Howard, if he's sick of politics, why did he take $10 million with him when he quit?
Well, I think his answer to that, at least in part, is on the question of whether he gave any money to Brad Ellsworth. As I understand it, and you can talk to him, and I hope you do, again, that neither the Democratic National Committee nor the Democratic Senatorial Committee gave a penny to Brad Ellsworth. But Evan Bayh's argument is that Evan Bayh, gave Brad Ellsworth $1 million. You know, I think politicians who leave are entitled to keep that nest egg around. I don't know if he's said that he would never return to politics. I think he got sick. He got sick of the way it was, and he'd been there a long time. He'd been governor for 8 years and senator, I guess, for what, 12 years, and he'd had enough, at least for the time being. But the larger point has to do with the two political parties. Are we going more in the direction of a kind of parliamentary system, which seems to be where the Tea Party wants to go, where there's a strict orthodoxy that everybody in the Republican Party has to follow, so you can't have, you know, the John Chafees anymore, you can't have the Michael Smerconishes anymore. And at least from Bayh's point of view, he worries that the Democrats are becoming that way. And one of the ironic results of the election results tonight is going to be to make both parties, I think, more ideologically rigid, because it is true that the Democrats are going to lose a lot of conservative Democrats in House races and Democrats who are representing Republican and red districts in the House. There's just no doubt about that.
Losing them in the general where Republicans lost them in the primary.
Let me duck in a call that we can now wrap up Georgia, which the polls closed more than an hour ago. NBC News projecting on the base of the early returns and the exit polling that Senator Johnny Isakson will return as senator there, having defeated or will defeat the Democrat Michael Thurmond. No big surprise there, and it doesn't change things. But we wanted to button that one up while the results came in, and he's, as you see, with 4% in, he's almost at 2-1 over the challenger, Mr. Thurmond. So
that's a state that Democrats used to win handily when we had more moderate Democrats. Rachel would have not liked them, but Sam Nunn used to win Georgia without any strain whatsoever. Democrats used to hold moderate seats, conservative Democratic seats, you might call them, in states like Texas with Lloyd Benson, Oklahoma, David Bourne. These seats are gone forever. And that's what Howard was talking about there. By the way, on that money, on that $10 million, Harry Reid could have used some of it.
Yeah.
Sestak could have used some of it. There were other Senate races that are going to be decided by a point or two that could have used some of that money. It can be used for a presidential.
On the disappearance of conservative Democrats, though, it was not liberal Democrats who pushed those guys out. No liberal Democrat came in and ended Sam Nunn's career. They lost as those states became more Republican.
David Bourne and Nunn walked away. They didn't lose.
What's happening on the right is that the conservative movement is eating the Republican moderates. There's nothing like that happening on the left.
What's happening on the left is what's happening in the Democratic Party is that there's an old rule of politics. You never ask a member of Congress to vote against their interests. And I think a lot of these people, although I supported it, cap and trade, and those kinds of votes are going to hurt them tonight. They're going to hurt them in those regions.
And it shows up in the House, too, where we have one call to make that is of particular interest because it is the second ripple effect from the Republican Senate primary in that state. This is to replace Mike Castle, who, of course, then went out and lost to Christine O'Donnell, who has now lost to what we believe will be Senator-elect Coons. And in the House race in Delaware, and that's it, District 1 is all you got, the Tea Party insurgent who bypassed the Republicans, Glenn Urquhart, will lose, according to our projections, to Democrat John Carney. The number of bellwethers tonight, as we said, is extraordinary, at least 136 of them. But the point that was made by our political unit in analyzing this race in advance, that if the Democrats were to win here, the Republicans' magic number to take the House would necessarily go up to 40, because it's simple math that it's a pickup. Right. And there's your pickup. So the point that was made to us by Tim Kaine, now, you know, Delaware,
they have blown two of them.
The Delaware Tea Party.
The whole point, the Delaware Tea Party cost Delaware a senator and its only congressman tonight. I mean, there might have been other implications in that House race. We can't say for sure.
We did definitely get a new celebrity.
The Delaware Tea Party, though, it was Sarah Palin and the National Tea Party that cost these seats because they piled into that race.
Christine O'Donnell turned out to be a particularly bad candidate. She was asked a softball question. We know what that is. She was asked, is there any Democrat you could work with if you got elected to the United States Senate? And she never thought of the name of Tom Carper of Delaware.
Well, she said in the Senate she wanted to work with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
But amazing.
To be fair, she said beforehand, she said, she's not in the Senate anymore. I would work. And then
that was the second time she answered the question.
The second time she interrupted the other answer and shouted Joe Lieberman, which sort of advanced the issue. It just proves that there is, my theory about the Tea Party in all respects has been the old idea of the universal solvent, which is that the substance that can dissolve any other substance on the planet. There is a problem eventually. The universal solvent is wonderful. If something's blocked here, we have to clean something. Got to get a stain out of my suit or your suit or whatever. The problem is ultimately, where the hell do you keep the stuff? Because it will eat through any container and eventually go right through to the center of the earth. And one of the arguments about extremism in American politics is eventually you will find some surface.
Some people will go to bed tonight worrying about the existence of the universal solvent. They worried about snakes until now. They got this new thing to worry about because of you.
Right here. But Lawrence, this is my point, that as crazy as it is, there will be a lot of people who will, to Chris's point about sleeping tonight, will sleep better knowing that of all all the things that will or won't happen, Christine O'Donnell is not in the U.S. Senate.
Well, they were able to sleep easy for a while. The polls were not indicating any suspense there, as they shouldn't have, and this is one of those, sanity moments in voters that we've all been kind of hoping for. This was an embarrassing campaign, embarrassing to the Republican Party, embarrassing for them to have to embrace that candidacy as they ultimately did.
Find the Rand Paul thing at all embarrassing at some points?
Yeah, but he's a genius compared to Christine O'Donnell. He's Nobel material compared to Christine O'Donnell. I'm sorry.
We're going to be watching Joe Miller very closely because him and Christine O'Donnell.
You know how every politician that comes on, there's certain cliches they all drop at the last minute. Like, I don't pay attention to polls. They always have a pollster they pay for. But, okay. I talked to a big politician, Bob Brady, the Philadelphia chairman of the party in Philadelphia, and he said, how's it going? He says, these polls are pretty good. It's nice to hear a politician say something refreshing like these professionals who poll people right up to election day in these tracking polls every day, every single day, every kind of poll, and we all put them together and look for some distilled truth in that. They're pretty good. Yeah. And we haven't seen a big surprise.
A lot of Democratic hopes right now are really riding on the idea of cell phone polling. People who've gotten rid of their landlines, like everybody I know has and I have, and instead are just using cell phones. Those people are not getting polled in the same way that other people are. A lot of Democratic hopes relying on that as a polling differential.
If the polls look, and if we can compliment the polls, at least perhaps before the night is over, we'll get a nice word from a politician about the pundits. And it's P-U-N-D-I-T-S.
I don't listen to pundits.
I'd just be happy if they pronounced it correctly rather than call it
That
pundits.
will happen when the universal solvent eats its way through to the center of the earth. I'm sorry.
Where the pundits come from, the center of the earth.
The nougat center of the earth. Chuck Todd is going to deliver us from this madness, covering tonight's elections by the numbers and not by the universal solvents. Chuck, please save us.
Oh, you got it. And I was glad, though, that you made the point. The magic number is now 40. We have a called House race, and it is a pickup. But I've been looking at the returns in Virginia because Virginia has 4 House races. Democrats that are very nervous about. Republicans are targeting them all. But the one I'm focusing on, and I think you guys are going to be interested in this panel, Rick Boucher. He's a long-time Democratic incumbent. This is a McCain seat. Out there in the western part of Virginia. I can tell you by looking at this vote, a lot of Democrats very nervous that there's not enough vote out there for Boucher to overtake Morgan Griffith in this one. And this is one of those where you're saying, okay, Republican districts may start voting Republicans in and not sort of holding out hope for these moderate Democrats. The interesting thing about Rick Boucher, he was a no on health care. A few other seats in Virginia. To me, it's the microcosm, frankly, of the House. You look at these districts here. There are 4 of them. Republicans think they can win 3 of the 4 and have a good night. Glenn Nye is somebody that Democrats are very nervous about. There's a very early amount of vote in. Scott Rigel still leading in this one. Let's look at the 5th District, Tom Perriello, the one place Barack Obama went. This was a district, of course, that they were hoping a 3rd candidate would make a difference. Guess what? That 3rd candidate's not getting much vote here, 3%. You can do the math here. 100 minus the combined 97%. Perriello needed the 3rd conservative candidate to get 6, 7, 8%. And then finally, there's the suburban district of Washington, D.C. This was the most Democratic district that there was that was being targeted by the Republicans. These are very early. Wouldn't jump to conclusions about this big lead. But, the whole race for the House really is a microcosm. You've got a very Republican district in the rural western part of Virginia, and Rick Boucher, he's losing. You got the two districts I told you about, the 5th, that sort of Charlottesville district that Democrats are hoping a 3-way contest would help them out there. They're losing there. Of course, Glenn Nye, Virginia Democrat in the 2nd district there, Democrats losing there. They lose 3 of 4 out of Virginia tonight, and that tells you a lot about the Republican chances.
All right, Chuck Todd with an early look at Virginia. And when we return, thank you, Chuck. The latest information from our exit polling. Lester Holt with that. MSNBC's midterm election night coverage will continue after this. We can call North Carolina. Again, no surprise there, as Senator Richard Burr, the Republican, retains that seat in North Carolina over the Secretary of State Elaine Marshall. And the actual hard count, a 55-44 split with more than 1/3 of that vote in. North Carolina, Senator Burr to be Senator-elect Burr. So, again, at this hour, The Senate representing one pickup, again in Indiana, where Evan Bayh, who should be getting $10 every time we mention him, or maybe he did already, but $10 more every time we mention him, has retired from that seat. And Mr. Coates has been elected tonight, or we believe so, according to our NBC News projections. We have new information from our exit polling. Lester Holt with the voice of the voter. And Lester, the topic is more or less government. I think I know the answers to this, but we'll defer to you on them.
Yeah, Keith, as we look through these numbers, one of the themes emerging tonight really is this whole role of government in all our lives, an issue that certainly has helped drive the Tea Party movement. We've been asking about this in our NBC News exit poll for years. And take a look at this. I want to go back to 1994, when a big Republican wave switched the House from Democratic to Republican. Back then, 56% said the government was doing too much. Take a look at today, same percentage, same number. But I want you to contrast that to 2008, when the wheels on the bus were falling off, the financial meltdown was happening. President Obama had just been elected. Back then, people kind of liked the idea of a little more government. 43% back then said the government was doing too much. Who is most worried about too much government? Well, the Tea Party supporters, people who put immigration at the top of their list of concerns, those who are very worried about the economy, and white voters without a college degree. In the debate over how far government should go to help solve problems, the pendulum appears to be swinging back toward less tonight, Keith.
The pendulum swings indeed. Lester Holt, voice of the voters, the exit polling. Thank you kindly. What does it mean, Chris?
Well, I think the perception of, as I said early tonight, I think that Bush did the bailout. Bush was president when we had the worst economic crisis since the 30s. Bush was president when the whole economic slide clearly began. And then Obama came in and used Keynesian economics to try to compensate for the drop in consumption, the drop in business investment with the larger federal expenditure, which is about, it added to the deficit. And so he was blamed for, quote, the growth of government. Then he could make good on the commitment for health care that had been made by every president, including Nixon and Teddy Roosevelt going back forever, and he was blamed for that. I just think it's the American people respond to symptoms, not to diagnosis. They respond to symptoms. When the economy's bad, they get mad. Now I got somebody tell me who to be mad at. That's the second step. And now it is that there's one guy in charge, it's a Democrat, who's a liberal, a relatively progressive Democrat. So you blame him. That's the easy part. That explains almost all of what happened tonight. Who's in and what's going on? Okay, the third thing they look for is a little more sophisticated argument. So the Republicans said it's all spending. Spending, spending, spending. Well, that's the problem. Now, do we want the federal government to deal with the mess that was created by private industry down in the Gulf? Do we want the federal government to show up when there's a tremendous flood? Yes. Do we want the federal government to protect our airline safety? Do we want the federal government to protect our food safety? Anything that affects me personally, we want some helping hand. We want the government to help us, not just during crisis, but most of our lives. Then there's a general notion that got started. I think Santelli. What was that guy's name?
Rick Santelli.
Okay, what was the beginning of the Tea Party notion? It was that we are somehow bailing out people that shouldn't have bought homes. That somehow we're giving them rent subsidies. We're not. Yeah. People are being kicked out of their homes. But somehow there was the notion that the worker bees were being screwed to help out the non-worker bees.
He was standing on the floor of a stock exchange pointing at people making six figures saying, these are the real Americans back here. The people who work at investment houses.
That meant less government because people thought of government as somebody who's shifting their wealth to the people that are lazy. And that's how he started Santelli. He really started this idea, and it plays into every kind of class and ethnic aspect of the country.
It is kind of the metaphor for this, or the symbol of it, was that possibly apocryphal phrase, get your damn government hands off my Medicaid. Yeah. That is, I want the government, or Medicare. The government is there when I want it, and I want it to not charge me.
You mean Medicare's a federal program?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't fall from the sky with the rain.
Don't know how to, and not only that, but do something about jobs. Do something about this economy. Do something.
But that's another point.
Less government.
That's concomitant with what Chris said, because the moment Lehman Brothers wobbled, that did not suddenly increase unemployment to 9.5%. Just as there was supposedly trickle down, there's also trickle down in bad news. And whoever the guy is there, when the bottom is hit, is the one whose fault it is.
The government's supposed to reduce the unemployment rate. Yeah. Well, how's it supposed to do it? It either spends more money, does something with the tax structure, does something, but it has to do something. So when people say less government, do they really want laissez-faire? Do they really mean get out of my face and let me be unemployed?
Exactly.
No, they say, where's my frickin' job?
But you look at I mean, the cause of the economic crisis that we're in is the financial crisis that we went through because of the collapse of the banking sector, right? So how does the electorate respond to that? By electing John Kasich of Lehman Brothers
I've
to
got
be
to
the governor
interrupt you.
of Ohio.
We've got to interrupt you. Connecticut is in. The Attorney General of Connecticut, Dick Blumenthal, the Democrat, is our NBC News projected winner for the Senate from Connecticut in a, again, you're talking about a lot of money going into that. That was against the wrestling promoter Linda McMahon in a campaign that everyone in the metropolitan New York area knew how much money was spent on it because every commercial break, including on the non-commercial stations, they bought time on those. And the early number, less than 1 to 2%, it's 60-39, but our projection is Mr. Blumenthal will take that seat and retain it for the retiring Chris Dodd. In a moment, we'll have the first results from Arkansas. Senator Blanche Lincoln has trailed heavily in the polling to the Republican John Bozeman. MSNBC's midterm election coverage and more from Connecticut will continue after this.
No, was John Kasich more in
Not a lot of 8:30 p.m. poll closings, but the one that represented on your map stands out in gold. Arkansas, a site of essentially a morality play, I guess, for the state of Arkansas, the Democratic Party, the unions, everybody else. And as of this hour, NBC News can project the outcome of the Arkansas Senate race based on the early results that John Bozeman, the Republican, will defeat the incumbent Senator Blanche Lincoln by a margin yet to be determined. So that's 2 Senate gains for the Republicans. Meanwhile, as we told you before the break, we were also projecting the Senate in Connecticut, where to replace the retiring Chris Dodd, the state Attorney General Richard Blumenthal has or will defeat Linda McMahon, his Republican opponent, in a hard-fought, I hate to use the term wrestling kind of match, but there it is. All right, so to this hour, Republicans with 2 gains in the Senate. The margin for them to take over would require more than that, to a total of 10, and that is still considered unlikely in the overall polling, although we have no new information to tell you that about that or to confirm that tonight. However, on the subject of Arkansas, Ed Schultz, the host of the Ed Schultz Show, the Ed Show, I always do that, here on MSNBC, joins us again from Las Vegas. And again, I use the term morality play for Blanche Lincoln in the old biblical sense of it, not in the moral versus immoral, but just tell this story from your perspective, Ed.
Well, welcome to primary hangover territory. The staunch effort by Bill Halter and the lefties to unseat Blanche Lincoln, I think, really hurt her campaign. She never really recovered. The winner tonight, John Bozeman, this guy is a 5-term House member. He's an arm twister. He's a staunch conservative. He's an Arkansas good old boy, former football player. He's been the assistant whip since 2003. He helps Eric Cantor count the votes and get what they want out of the House. And he knows Washington. But he's very familiar in Arkansas. He's a staunch conservative. And when you look at Blanche Lincoln, she was too close to the corporations in the eyes of the Democrats. She was too close to Walmart. In fact, they called her the Senator Walmart. And she really never, got on track. Bill Clinton went down there and helped her out. Bill Clinton pretty much threw the union folk under the bus. That, of course, infuriated a lot of people. I know President Clinton's done a lot of great things, but here's the former president from Arkansas can't help out a Democratic senator, which is a strange dynamic. But that's the way it played out in Arkansas. And had she had been going up against someone that maybe wasn't well known, she might have had a better chance. But Bozeman had the money. He had the reputation. He's well placed in the House, and he will be a tough cookie for the Republicans and a real staunch conservative for them now in the Senate. So for Bill Halter, you can say that maybe if he hadn't have done the primary run, but this is a casualty for the Democrats, and it is one that they certainly expected tonight. And Keith, if I can just for 1 second go back to Indiana, sources are telling me tonight that people inside the Democratic caucus are not happy with Evan Bayh walking with $10 million. His political career is not over. He's going to run for governor. That's going to be coming up. And Harry Reid could have used that money. Joe Sestak could have used that money. And the term that's been put to me is Evan Bayh was kind of aloof. He was not one for really helping out a lot other senators in the Senate. And he leaves maybe with $10 million, but not a whole lot of real close friends, if you know what I mean.
Well, the human sacrifice portion of our coverage tonight, when we actually put him on the spit, will be a little bit later on. We've got a lot of, deserved or otherwise, a lot of coverage of Evan Bayh tonight. To forward this, in his victory speech, Mr. Coates intends to say, according to Politico, we have every reason in Indiana to be proud because with your help, we have done our part by turning a U.S. Senate seat from one that fundamentally enabled the Obama regime to one that firmly opposes it. So that new time of moderation, Lawrence, has already begun.
It's a nice word, regime. What I'm wondering about in Arkansas is how is the Blanche Lincoln outcome different from what we've been talking about as Republican right-wing purging of their party.
Interrupting you to declare a winner in West Virginia, Governor Joe Manchin, according to NBC News, is the projected victor in a very important, pivotal Senate race for the Democrats. Joe Manchin, who tacked right through much of the campaign against a lot of money spent on behalf of and by his Republican opponent, John Racy, who received in grants, his companies received in grants from the state of West Virginia in the last 10 years and contracts, $32 million just from the state of West Virginia. That's how healed he was in this. We'll take over that seat in West Virginia. It remains in Democratic hands, as you see the swing of 2 in the Senate, having the results that we have so far, principally, again, Indiana, the first of those tonight. All right, where we were now.
Very hard for them to take the Senate now.
Yeah,
very hard. They have to sweep now everything we haven't announced yet. And I think Manchin is an example. We all know about the issues he had to compromise with. We know what he had to do to get reelected or get elected. But there is something to be said for political talent and winning elections. In a night that they're not going to have many winners. I think Manchin will be one of the Democratic stars coming out of tonight. West Virginia will be very important in the next presidential election. Bill Clinton has always done well there. Barack Obama's done nothing there. They got to stop giving up states permanently. They got to stop fighting for them.
It should be noted, though, John Racy was a stupendous candidate. I mean, John Racy was in Christine O'Donnell, Joe Miller territory in terms of his sheer...
Oh, stupendous bad.
Stupendously entertaining, and I think bad. I mean, this is the guy who said that he pretended that Stephen Chu, the Energy Secretary's name, was Dr. Chow Mein. This is the guy who's not only lived in Florida, but whose wife lost her West Virginia voter registration because they lived in Florida. The guy who had his driveway paved in pink marble, who talked about earning his money, earning his money the old-fashioned way, by inheriting it, and he wasn't joking. He didn't get that. People usually say that as a joke. I mean, this guy said that he wanted to go back to 19th century labor laws. In West
to the
Virginia.
minimum wage in West Virginia, which is not a winning
Well, that's not a win. So he was a terrible candidate.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, it was a race. You know, I mean, even with that, it was a race. And Manchin, one of his problems was he had a 70% approval rating as governor. That was actually a problem for him, that people thought he was such a good governor, that Racy's best argument was, well, if you like him so much as governor, just keep him as governor, and I'll go and deal with evil Washington.
It's a tough race for a Democrat to hold on to a seat that the Democrats had held for 50 years. He ran, by the way, to the right of every Democrat in the Senate. He ran way to the right of Ben Nelson in order to win that seat.
Yeah, he did.
But again, politics, you know, if the Democrats were willing to boot Ted Kennedy's seat, which they did boot up there, because they didn't take it seriously. It is a profession, politics, and at some point you got to wake up and win. And at least they won West Virginia tonight. And they got Blumenthal in there with all his problems, although I think Dick Blumenthal has got to make a statement at some point about his record of service or non-service in the war in Vietnam. And get that straight and get it behind him as soon as possible.
He better be the senator from IAVA, from Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, once he gets in there, if he wants to make it right by Democrats.
And what would that be?
That would be doing everything right by Democrats. We need a leader in the Senate right now on veterans issues. We've got 2 million people coming out of these decade-long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're going to need not just people going along with the Democratic agenda on veterans issues. We're going to need hardcore leadership. And Blumenthal, this is a great step for him, great place for him to step in.
Let me bring Ed Schultz back in from Las Vegas for a question that mixes together West Virginia and Connecticut and Indiana. Why was Indiana, of those three, different, Ed, in the sense that, all right, there was a brutal primary, but the brutal primary was because a Democratic senator stood up as hard as she could against the Democratic primary effort at the beginning of this year to get health reform passed. Was that the distinguishing thing? Why ultimately Arkansas was not salvageable, and to whatever degree West Virginia was salvageable?
Well, I think there's no question that the primary hurt Blanche Lincoln. She had a motivated liberal base against her that poured a lot of money into Bill Halter's campaign. They did a lot of boots on the ground. You had Democrats working against a Democrat. You had liberals working against a Democrat that thought that she didn't do a very good job on health care and fought it all the way. And they were mad at her. And I was down there for the primary night, and this was one that we knew was going to have a tidal wave in aftermath of not being good and having a good outcome. And Bozeman didn't say anything controversial. Bozeman didn't go out and get into the Tea Party crowd. Bozeman just played to his good old boy sense of small town Arkansas, connected, he's trusted, and she really went up against the perfect storm. She went up against the liberal base, and she went up against a well-known in Arkansas. Now, as far as Indiana is concerned, no primary there. I mean, heck, that's the first time a Democratic president has taken that, presidential election in that state since what, back in the 60s? So the different dynamics are playing out there. Now, on a lighter note, as far as Mr. Racy is concerned in West Virginia, Rush Limbaugh did a big thing on his radio show about how well he knew this guy. In fact, they even have a locker room next to each other down at the golf club there in Florida.
That helped.
So that didn't help too much. Stay away from Rush if you want to get into the Senate.
Ed, it's Lawrence O'Donnell. I want to ask you more about Blanche Lincoln. In retrospect, does it look wise to have challenged Blanche Lincoln in a primary and weakened her, if that's what happened, given that she, in fact, did not fight health care all the way. She was a member of the Senate Finance Committee. She voted for the Senate Finance Committee bill. She was one of the pro-choice votes in the Senate Finance Committee, where not all Democrats voted for the pro-choice components of that health care bill. She, in fact, helped it get out onto the Senate floor. She, in fact, helped it pass on the Senate floor. She did all that, and it was judged not enough by liberals who wanted to take her out in the primary. They failed. They left a wounded nominee. Now, are those liberals who did that happy that they did that? And are they, at the same time, cheering the election of a much more conservative Democrat from West Virginia to the Senate that we've seen tonight?
Yeah. All of the things you say, Lawrence, are spot on, but the fact is it was the public option. She did not support that.
Neither did
that
Barack
was the trigger
Obama.
for that's true. That's very true. But that was the point of contention. The liberal base, the PCCC, and some other lefty organizations out there were upset about the fact, number one, the president didn't go on the stump and fight for the public option, that a deal was cut. Blanche Lincoln was part of that deal, not to advocate for the public option, and it was that issue. Now, all the things you're saying are correct, but she didn't go far enough. The other thing that the liberal base was very excited about was that Bill Halter, at the time, just before the primary, was polling better against the Arkansas congressman than was Blanche Lincoln.
Right.
They were making the case they had a better chance to win this seat than if they had gone with Blanche Lincoln. So those two things, the polling and also the public option. The public option is going to come back and sting, I think, a lot of people when it comes to when this night is over.
Do you expect this same liberal activity that took place against Blanche Lincoln to be there 6 years from now to try to defeat Manchin in a primary in West Virginia? Because he's going to be far to the right of Blanche Lincoln in the Senate.
Well, I think that health care is not going to be the divide in the road that it was in the past, Lawrence. It's going to be the Supreme Court ruling on the money going from the corporations unlimited to candidates. The Democrats are going to have to unite, and the Democrats are going to have to take a strong stand, shoulder to shoulder, on dealing with this. This is the next huge issue if they maintain the majority in the House and in the Senate. And so your question about it being the dividing mark later on, you know, politics changes so much.
Right.
2 years is an eternity, but I would venture to say that it won't be the divide in the road that it was in the past, because I think a lot of lefties are going to get upset if Mitch McConnell and John Boehner get their way of not compromising on anything, making President Obama the target in 2012, and repealing health care. That could be a real help to the Democrats.
All right, Ed Schultz, thank you kindly. And consider this, Lawrence, the prospect that the world of just in Arkansas changed so abruptly with the advent of the Tea Party and the Republican resurgence of the last year. Between that preparations for the primary in Arkansas and the preparations for the general, one could almost see if that Tea Party thing had been more evident earlier, the unions and everyone else might have left her alone.
Right.
But
we may have elected in West Virginia a vote in favor of repealing the Obama health care bill, which Blanche Lincoln enabled to be legislated.
Right. See that, and we'll see on that. In fact, let's discuss that with our next guest. Still ahead, the AFL-CIO Richard Trumka. Also, Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who would welcome that vote. And we await poll closings at the top of the hour. Big races, Colorado, Wisconsin. Stand by.
Ask Luke Russard's over at the Republican National Committee headquarters with Michael Steele, the chairman of the party. Luke, take it away.
Chris, I'm here with RNC Chairman Michael Steele. And Mr. Steele, how are you feeling so far this night around 8:30 p.m.?
Very good. I mean, you know, the races are starting to come in, and we're getting a sense of where the country's headed right now. As we've always known, the Senate was going to be a tough haul for us because of just the sheer numbers and the geographic regions you got to cover across the country. But the House, it looks like it's going to be a very strong night. We're very excited about that. State legislative races, which we've also focused on at the Republican Committee, are going to be a very important watch for us as well, because that gets into redistricting for next year and beyond, and who controls that process along with the governor. So it's going to hopefully be a good night.
Do you see the tide that's going in the GOP favor tonight as a vote for the GOP or a vote against the Obama administration?
You know, I don't see it as so much one or the other. What I think is happening after spending the 6 weeks on the road across America, the American people are saying very clearly, we're going to make up our minds as to who we want in leadership, and we're going to send the message to both parties, quite frankly. It's time for you to pay attention to us. It's time for you to take seriously our agenda, and it's time for you to start doing the people's business in Washington and the state capitals. So I think tonight, while we will definitely be a beneficiary of the voters' intent to make a change, we still have to own up to that, and we still have to work to keep that support and that faith that they're putting in us tonight as we go into 2011.
If there's a mandate that you walk away from tonight, what is that?
Pay attention. Pay attention. If you away, this will just be one night in history. But if we continue to focus on the people's agenda, and we get here and we cut the spending, we cut the debt and the deficit, we empower the small businesses as we said we would, that we support families and the communities more than we support the institutions of government, then you can begin to build off of this night going into 2012 and beyond.
Now, the AP is reporting that Rick Boucher and Tom Perriello in Virginia have gone down already. Are you surprised that Virginia is now seeming to trend back towards red, or did you see that coming all along? I mean, Boucher was an incumbent for a long time.
He was an incumbent for a long time, and yeah, I mean, I think the trend lines in Virginia were there. I have to give hats off to the Democrats who sort of figured out earlier on, how to position some of their candidates to win in Virginia. But when you have to carry the water for Nancy Pelosi, and you have to vote, one way in Washington, and your rhetoric is different at home, the people figure that out. And I think you're seeing a lot of that happening around the country tonight.
What single result do you think the American people will feel literally in the next few months from the probable GOP victories here across the board?
I think probably the tenor and the tone of the conversation will change. I know the leadership will be looking to partner as much as possible with the administration to fix some of the concerns that the people have on health care, on cap and trade, on small business.
So you think Republicans will be willing to compromise then to some degree?
I don't know what the leadership is planning. What I'm saying is the tone will be different. And I think the tone is going to be much more tuned into what the people are out there have been saying over the last few months.
Mr. Steele, thank you so much for your time. Keith, back to you.
Luke Russert, thank you kindly. One of those moments where the Republicans get a scalp that they sought. We now have projection election out of the Florida 8th District. The winner there is Daniel Webster, a challenging Tea Party Republican, and the loser there would be Congressman Alan Grayson. With two-thirds of the vote in, a handy victory. The House resources that were available to the Republicans were spent heavily in this district. Grayson was one of the top 5 or 10 targets, certainly among incumbent Democrats, and that one will sting for the Democratic Party. Alan Grayson, certainly one of the more upfront members during that health debate, and many others in the last 2 years.
Well, he was also considered a test case by many liberals, making the argument that Democrats made the mistake of going too far to the middle. Alan Grayson went very clearly to the left, and it didn't work in his district.
Let's bring in Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Thank you, Congresswoman, for coming on. I love having you on Hardball, and I've got to ask you a hardball question. We're getting a difference of opinion about what should be #1 item in the Republican queue, the want list. If you can't get the Bush tax cuts made permanent in the lame duck, is that a more important priority than repealing health care? What's the most important issue you'd like to make H.R. 1?
Let's extend those tax cuts.
Number one
Let's
goal.
make certain that's the #1 goal,
Okay.
and then we have to also repeal the health care bill. You know, what we are seeing, Chris, is not a political divide in the country. It truly is a philosophical divide. And you've got those that want a smaller government. They want to see these tax cuts extended. They want the spending stopped. They want the deficit and the debt addressed. They want the environment created for jobs growth to take place. And that is government's job. You also have them wanting to see the health care bill repealed. That is a checklist that we need to get to work on day one. Now, on the other side, you do have those who think you ought to grow the size of government and increase taxes and let government run health care and everything else. So I think the philosophical divide is incredibly pronounced in this election cycle.
Well, I think you've set it up pretty well, but let me ask you the question. You're going to extend the tax cuts. It'll increase the deficit substantially. What will you offset that with? You're talking about reducing the size of government. What will you get rid of in the government to pay for the tax cuts?
Yes, amazing thing. Cut federal spending.
Yeah, what?
And every year, let me tell you how you do this. And our states have done this very successfully, and we need to learn from them. It's across-the-board spending cuts. And every year,
Social Security, Medicare, cut all those, cut defense, cut all those. You said across the board.
Discretionary across the board. You start with
defense, Social Security,
spending.
Medicare, Medicaid. You cut everything across the board.
That is not what I said. That's not what I said. I said you start with discretionary spending, and you do across-the-board cuts. Our Democrat governor in Tennessee did this 8 years ago, and it has been done successfully. They have given us a model to use.
Okay, discretionary spending includes defense spending. Would you cut defense across the board as well as domestic spending?
No, you do not cut defense, and you don't
so it's
cut
not really
Homeland
across
Security.
the board because you've excluded. Now you're playing the game. No Medicare cuts, no Social Security cuts, no Medicaid cuts, no defense cuts. What are you going to cut? Because you've reduced it now to the playing field of about 8 or 9% of the federal budget you're willing to touch with what you call across-the-board cuts. In other words, nothing across the board, just a careful area.
I said that is step one.
Name the programs you're going to cut.
You start there. You start with all of your discretionary spending.
Name the programs.
And you do across-the-board spending cuts. Now, we've been through this before in our states.
That's why we read through it before, because we never get there. Name what we're going to cut.
And then you have an adult conversation about how to address Medicare and Social Security and the entitlements. It's amazing when you put priorities into budgets. Our states have been very successful with this.
May I ask?
It works, and that is what we are going to do. You're going to see the leadership go that direction. Make the tax reductions permanent. Cut the federal spending. The American people have spoken out tonight. As I said, it's not partisan, it's philosophical. They do not like the track this country is on, and they're ready to get the country on the right track.
Can I just ask one clarifying question, just so I understand what you were just trying to tell Chris? Do you believe that defense spending is discretionary spending?
No, I think that you have to fund the efforts of the military, and we all know that.
What does discretionary mean?
Discretionary spending is what you have in a lot of our federal programs in different departments. I'll be happy to sit down with you. As a matter of fact, when I was in the state Senate in Tennessee and then again in Congress, I did a project called Budget School. That would be a great thing to go through and do. Go through the federal budget and go through it line by line and talk about what is there. talk about what we're doing and about the priorities that are there. This election cycle, we have seen the American people more informed and more energized and more focused than ever before. It's an opportunity for us to go through an education process of how the federal government works. And I've got to tell you, I think Speaker Boehner, Leader Cantor, and a lot of new individuals that are coming to Congress are ready to take on that task and work with the American people.
Congresswoman, I have to interrupt. We're out of time because of the closings at the top of the hour. Thank you kindly, Congresswoman Blackburn of Tennessee and the Budget School. She did not indicate whether she was a student or a teacher. We'll have more closings in 13 states at the top of the hour. At approximately 9 p.m. in the East, polls closed in 13 more states on this midterm 2010. NBC News can now project that the Republicans have won control of the House of Representatives. The NBC News decision desk projecting that when all the votes are counted nationwide, Republicans will hold 236 seats. The Democrats will hold 199 seats in the new House of Representatives. The margin of error there is plus or minus 13. So the margin of leadership by the House would be 37 for the Republicans, and our margin of error is a total swing of 26. So this projection is outside the total margin of error for the Republicans to take the House as expected. And here it is how it would look graphically speaking. The current margin for the Democrats, a 77-seat margin in the House, would become a Republican 37-seat margin. It could be as low as a 24-seat margin. It is still the high end of those projections about the House of Representatives now in Republican control, according to our NBC News decision desk projections. We've seen some of the particulars of this throughout the night. Alan Grayson falling in Florida as a headline, as a bold print name, and that's what it looks like to this point. Again, plus or minus 13, the total swing 26 on the margin of error, and thus that projection of a 39 point, that not 37 but 39 point here. We've got two competing numbers, either 237 198 or 236 199. It amounts to roughly the same thing. Outside the margin of error, that's the projection for the House. We'll be talking about that. Let's run the table on the other data we have for you. The North Dakota Senate first, the victory there again here for the North Dakota Republican John Hoeven. So that then brings us into the House. Some expected results. Chuck Schumer in the New York Senate. He will return easily, as will his colleague Kirsten Gillibrand, who was the Democratic incumbent as well. In the Kansas Senate race, this will be a Republican victory for Jerry Moran. In South Dakota, we are expecting that since he ran unopposed, John Thune is the winner, not the projection winner. He's it. Nobody voted against him. There wasn't anybody running against him. In Wisconsin, it is too close to call. Not too early, but too close between the incumbent Russ Feingold, for whom Democrats retain hopes, against his Republican challenger Ron Johnson. In Colorado, it is too close to call in the race between the incumbent, the appointee Senator Bennett, and his Republican challenger Mr. Buck. In Louisiana, it is too early to call in the race between the Senator Vitter and Mr. Melanson, the congressman and Democratic challenger there. In Pennsylvania, it is too close to call between Joe Sestak and the Republican Pat Toomey in the race for Arlen Specter's old seat. And in Illinois, it is also too close to call between Alexei Janulius and Mark Kirk. Meanwhile, the official verbiage for Missouri is it is too early to call, with 2% of the vote in, and what is seemingly a big Republican lead in that race between Roy Blunt and Robin Carnahan. The Senate pickups to this point, a +3, Arkansas, Indiana, and North Dakota. The swing there for the Republicans in the Senate. We've already told you about the projections on the House. So this is how the House looks at this hour. I'm sorry, correction, the Senate at this hour. Republicans +3 at a 45-37 with Mr. Lieberman and Mr. Sanders counted in the independent poll. And again, what the House looks like, this is the number we're going with, 237 198. That's what it will look like, with a plus or minus margin of about 13 seats. And so we're dealing with the high end, I think, Chris, of the projections.
Around 80 almost.
Yeah, a total swing.
It tells you that Boehner whatever his talents as a leader, will have a relatively easy time with that. You only take 218 to get something through the House. And you have the 5-minute rule. You have a tremendous disciplinary system built in. It's not hard to run that place if you got this kind of 20-seat padding right now. So he'll be able to get through anything he wants on tax. Any corporate or business tax cuts will fly through. I'm not sure about an outright repeal of health care. We'll see. But clearly, on anything to do with the classic Republican stuff, which is cutting taxes, this guy's going to walk through this stuff. It'll go right to the Senate. And if the Senate is very evenly divided, there'll be a real fight over there.
That margin, as we see it now, does that suggest the likelihood of some challenge to his speakership is diminished because Republicans and even those Tea Partiers who have their own wavelength would not challenge him because of that potential margin and what you could do with it if they remain unified?
Well, you're ahead of me on that. I haven't heard of a challenge being planned, and I think the Republican Party is a much more orderly party than the Democrats generally. I haven't heard of any kind of a Jerry Ford plan, any coup going on. I don't think Boehner's done anything wrong, but I do think it's going to be interesting. If he has 80 new people in, a lot of them Tea Partiers, he's going to have to be a really smart leader to keep everybody together.
Speaking of the Tea Party, Rand Paul is making his victory speech in Kentucky, and we're going to join it right now.
Thank you. What a crowd. I'd like to thank my wife, Kelly. I couldn't have done it without her. And my boys, William and Duncan and Robert, and for the great music. Thank you, guys. I have a message. A message from the people of Kentucky. A message that is loud and clear and does not mince words. We've come to take our government back. They say that the U.S. Senate is the world's most deliberative body. Well, I'm going to ask them to deliberate upon this. The American people are unhappy with what's going on in Washington. 11% of the people approve of what's going on in Congress. But tonight, there's a Tea Party tidal wave, and we're sending a message to them. It's a message that I will carry with me on day one. It's a message of fiscal sanity. It's a message of limited constitutional government and balanced budgets. When I arrive in Washington, I will ask them respectfully to deliberate upon this. We are in the midst of a debt crisis, and the American people want to know why we have to balance our budget and they don't. I will ask them respectfully to deliberate upon this. Government does not create jobs. Individual entrepreneurs, businessmen and women create jobs, but not the government. I will ask them respectfully to deliberate upon this. Why is America great? Why are we the greatest, richest, and freest country ever known to man? America is exceptional, but it is not inherently so. America is exceptional because we embraced freedom, because we enshrined it in our documents, and because we have lived and fought for the principles of freedom. America will remain great if we remain proud of America, if we remain proud of the American system, the system that is enshrined in our founding documents, the system that protects and promotes the free exchange of goods, the system that protects capitalism that has made this country great. America will remain great if and when we understand, that government cannot create prosperity. We have to understand that it comes from ourselves. It does not come from government. We are the creators of that prosperity. Until we understand that, we cannot truly protect and defend our liberties. I have great confidence in the American system. We must believe in ourselves and not believe that somehow some benevolent leader in a distant capital will take care of us, will save us from ourselves. We must once again believe in ourselves. I will ask the Senate respectfully to deliberate upon this. Do we wish to live free or be enslaved by debt? Do we believe in the individual or do we believe in the state? Thomas Jefferson wrote that government is best that governs least. Likewise, freedom is best when enjoyed by the most. America can rise up and surmount these problems if we just get government out of our way. I am humbled by the honor bestowed upon me by the voters of Kentucky. I will do everything within my power to live up to that trust. America's best days lie ahead of her. If we can once again unleash the creative genius, the entrepreneurial spirit, the faith in ourselves that is the American dream. Thank you, and God bless America.
Senator-elect Rand Paul of Kentucky with a rousing, if somewhat boilerplate speech that was predicated on the description of the United States Senate, which he will join, as the world's most deliberative body. And we were debating back and forth about, since every quote and all the structure of that speech originated and hung on that. Anybody heard that before? Wasn't it greatest deliberative body or most formidable deliberate body?
Greatest it used to be. It used to be greatest.
Now it's just deliberative.
Now it's most. So you should deliberate a lot.
It used to be the world's most exclusive men's club. That was an earlier phrase.
Well, it's getting that way again, but that's another story.
I thought that was classic. I wouldn't call it, well, I would call it Goldwater. And it was unmodified. He would have said, and we shouldn't have used the Interstate Commerce Clause to justify or allow the constitutionality of the Civil Rights Bill. I think if you got him under sodium pentothal, he would include all that. That was pretty close to everything he believes, but not everything.
He is a man on a very fast collision course with his principles. One of the early votes he will be asked to cast in the United States Senate is the single most important vote ever cast by members of the House and the Senate, and that is on the debt ceiling. Our debt ceiling is now $14.3 trillion. It will need to be raised in the coming year. He just used the phrase enslaved by debt. Yeah. This is exactly what he stands against. If he, and he is as a single United States Senator, empowered to prevent us from raising the debt ceiling, because it must be raised on a date certain at a particular time on the clock, or the United States government goes into default. If he filibusters the debt ceiling beyond that point, he can not only destroy the credit rating of the United States of America, he can wreak havoc on the world financial markets, cause a worldwide depression with one consistent holding to principle, which is his notion of the American government's relationship to debt. This, by the way, is a challenge for Boehner in the House, his worst challenge. He must, and he knows it, pass a debt ceiling increase in his Republican House of Representatives. He will do it. But Rand Paul can stop it by himself.
Well, but the Republicans look back at 1995, they look back at Newt Gingrich and the government shutdown, and the lesson this year, before this year, the lesson was that was horrible. It was right, but they look back at that government shutdown and they think, before this year, the lesson of that was, oh, the Republicans went too far. This year, Republicans' lesson on that was, we should have gone farther. We should have held it closed for longer. They're going to look at that. They've already been talking about this. They're going to look at that debt ceiling vote.
Government shutdown is nothing compared to the debt ceiling.
I know, but the Republican rhetoric around this cannot be underestimated. People as centrist in the Republican Party as Michael Steele have said there will be no compromise on that debt ceiling vote. Mike Lee of Utah, Rand Paul of Kentucky. It is not just one guy.
Michael Steele doesn't understand what it is. He's the same guy who didn't know what the minimum wage was when I asked him. They do not comprehend the worldwide economic depression that would be caused instantaneously by the United States government defaulting on its debt, which they are empowered to make happen.
Mitch McConnell understands it.
He does.
So Mitch McConnell understands it.
And he kind of understands Rand Paul. A little bit.
Kind of. So
you think Mitch McConnell won't let him do it?
Well, I think he will try his best to find a way to keep him from doing it. And Mitch McConnell is about as good as anybody in the world at the byways and techniques of the Senate. I mean, he's really, really good.
Rand Paul can vote against it. You only need 51 votes to pass it. But Rand Paul is empowered to filibuster it. Will he? His principles say he must.
It certainly would cut to the chase in terms of getting government off your back, since there wouldn't be one. That would simplify things considerably.
Not just this government, governments around the world.
That's my point. So there, in fact, that's anarchy. I believe there used to be before we threw the word communist out at people that we did not like, we threw the word anarchist out at them in the late 19th century. And you're suggesting that this is what could be on the table if Mr. Paul were to, in fact, Senator-elect Paul were to, in fact, take that position.
This is a real question. Lawrence is raising this not as I think as hyperbole, but this is an issue that they're really seriously debating on the right.
This is the only person I'm aware of who will take the oath of office as a United States Senator who I believe is capable of doing this.
Mike Lee already said he would. It's not just one. That's the amazing thing. If it were only Rand Paul, he would be the story. The story is what's happened to the Republican Party this year, that there are a number of them. And somebody should ask Jim DeMint shortly if that's going to be his first crusade.
I believe this brings us back to the subject of the universal solvent, because we have now found it. Bring Mr. Schultz back in from Las Vegas and the idea of the debt ceiling. Is it possible that Senator-elect Tea Party himself might vary from his stated positions, even in his accepted speech, in his moment of glory, in his succession of A-plus conservative wisdom phrases there? Could he, in fact, have said this and meant something else?
You know, Keith, this is the intrigue. This guy's got a personality that he projects that he's not beholden to anybody. I mean, this guy is now the lead dog in the pack of the Tea Party. Not only is he winning by a commanding number, but he comes out tonight. Now, think about this panel here is immense knowledge and experience when it comes to politics. How many of you have seen an acceptance speech like that? I mean, he came out on a roll tonight. He didn't come out saying, gosh, I'm really thankful for the people behind me and all. He came out almost dictating that this is the way it's going to be. And I don't think that this guy's beholden to anybody. I think that he is going to be just as much a problem for the Republicans and even Jim DeMint. Probably Jim DeMint's probably the only guy that's going to be able to go over and throw cold water on this guy. And so this is very interesting. And what Lawrence says is spot on. Now, Rand Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, he's one of these guys that kind of hangs out with the birthers every now and then. And so he's just the kind of guy that would keep this birth certificate conversation alive. But I have a question, as we have been reporting tonight that the control of the House is going to the Republicans. 4 years ago, in the midst of an avalanche of criticism of the Bush administration, Nancy Pelosi took impeachment off the table. I want to ask Mr. Boehner tonight, are you going to take impeachment off the table? Or are we going to go down this road of divide? Are we going to go down this road of investigations? Michelle Bachmann's going to be on later. She's talking about subpoenas and investigations. Well, there's your number, 237 to 198. Now the ball's in their court. And are they going to take impeachment off the table, or are they going to subscribe over in the House, say, you know, hey, we really like this Rand Paul guy. We can really stir some things up with it. We are living in some very interesting political times. Now, what we've also seen tonight is money. Rand Paul couldn't have done it without Tea Party money. Russ Feingold is proving in Wisconsin you could be the best lefty in the world, but if you're down 4-1 in money, you could very easily lose. And here in Nevada, Harry Reid is making a hell of a pitch to keep his job, fighting all of this money, having been outgunned. This, I don't know about you, this is the most fun I think I've ever had. This is awesome, what is unfolding here. I mean, this is some great stuff going on in America.
Can I just say one thing to the West Coast and California
if you
voters?
Do it in 10 seconds, you get Joe Manchin.
The polls are still open, and so all the past tenses we use here are about East Coast voting, and I hate the notion that anything we do here might in any way inhibit West Coast voters from going to polls.
That's right.
All right, good. Senator Manchin, Senator-elect Joe Manchin giving his victory speech in West Virginia.
And it works so well for us, and we're going to continue to fight for West Virginia every day of our life. I can only say that I want to thank all the people of West Virginia for believing in me. I really, truly appreciate every one of them. You know, we never thought we would ever lose our beloved Senator Byrd, but the good Lord had other plans. And leaving the governor's office was one of the toughest decisions I had to make. And we achieved so much as a state working together, but I can tell you, I'm proud of what we've been able to do. I have proud of every one of our accomplishments. But when I look at what challenges we have ahead of us in Washington, I know it's time to take that fight there. Tonight, I want all of you to celebrate this victory because it's all of you that made it happen. Every one of you. I want to thank my senior senator for being here, Senator Jay Rockefeller. I thank him so much. Because tomorrow starts the rebuilding, the road of rebuilding America. We must start tomorrow. And I really believe that Washington could learn a few things and a few lessons from West Virginia. Yes! A little common sense goes a long way, I can tell you that. You know, we acknowledge that Washington has broken. And when you look, and I said this on the campaign trail so much, when you look and you see putting the party first or putting your personal agenda or political agenda second and the country last, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not how we do things in West Virginia. It's not how we've repaired things and made them better. We put West Virginia first, and it's time to put America first. Yeah. We've got to be very careful when the political parties start putting the next election ahead of the next generation. That's serious, and we can't let that happen. There's no way we can let that happen. It is all about the generation that's coming behind us. And you can see in our family, we do have. We've replenished the generations very well. I didn't, when we look at all, and I look at all of my colleagues and everybody who works so close, I didn't make all these changes in West Virginia by myself. No one person can do that. And I can't make all the changes in Washington myself. I'll need my leadership from my dear Senator Rockefeller, my senior senator, and all of the senators on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republicans working together. Now, I want you to know, I'm going there, and I intend to work with everyone who's willing to put their country first. If you put the country first, I don't care whether you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, business, or labor. That's how we do it, and it works well. And that country will be much better off because of that. That's how we rebuild America, and we'll get America back on track. We will get her back on track. We owe it to our country. We owe it to the state that we all love so dearly, and we owe it to our beloved Senator Robert C. Byrd. But let me tell you, most of all, we owe it to every West Virginian, and every place of this great state. We owe it to them. Yes. We owe it to them to rebuild America, to make America strong again, and we will do it. And we are determined. I, again, want to thank each and every one of you. Without you, I couldn't have done it. With all the volunteers and people that came out from every nook and cranny of West Virginia, for all the ground troops that you all put on, unbelievable. We had an air attack and a ground attack. You can't lose when you've got all of your armies working together.
Governor Joe Manchin, the senator-elect from West Virginia, in a victory over the Republican challenger John Racy, and we're going to dip back into the Senate in a moment, but we wanted to get a statement on the record here from the Democratic congressional chair, the campaign chair, Chris Van Hollen, the congressman from Maryland, who said, as we declared earlier at the top of the hour, about 25 minutes ago, that the NBC News decision desk had projected the House to go to the Republicans by a margin of about 37, with a plus or minus of 13 on that. Mr. Van Hollen has called that prediction, quote, a mistake. And we're putting that on the record from his perspective before we resume our discussion of the Rand Paul victory in Kentucky and the victory now by Governor Manchin, soon to be Senator Manchin in West Virginia, along with all the other events of the evening. Getting back to our discussion of the Rand Paul victory in Kentucky, we're joined now by Matt Kibbe from Freedom Works, and we thank you for your time tonight, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We heard in that speech from Senator-elect Paul about the nation being enslaved by debt, which led our panel here to discuss this subject of whether or not that meant that as Senator-elect Paul would in fact filibuster against what is the annual and universally approved increase of the federal debt ceiling, and despite the worldwide consequences that might have for the economy. Do you have any insight into that? Is that what he meant by saying we are enslaved by debt?
No, I don't think that's what he meant, but I don't have any particular insight on that. I think the debt ceiling, and when it comes up in this next congressional year, it matters if it happens early or late. And understand that that has always been, as you said, a pro forma vote. It's kind of an opportunity for politicians to posture. I think what Rand Paul and this new generation of Tea Party candidates is going to bring to the House and Senate is a serious discussion about how do we rein in government so that we can get a handle on debt. And I think that's a healthy thing. I don't think that's a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. I think that's exactly where the center of politics is in this election.
We're going to resume with the questioning in a second. I just have to get a result in now that we can call, NBC News can call the Louisiana Senate race. No surprise here. Congressman Charlie Mélenchon being defeated by the incumbent Senator David Vitter, returning to Washington with the actual hard count still at less than 2%. A very strong number there, but the projection is again Vitter to return to the seat. And at this hour, let's look at where the Senate stands. There's still the swing here. The growth by the Republican is 45-38 at this point of the 37 senatorial elections tonight. And to resume with Matt Kibbe, and Lawrence O'Donnell wanted to pick up on that point we were discussing before the Louisiana result.
Matt Kibbe, on the debt ceiling, which just for the audience, it is the nation's credit card limit. We obviously run a debt in this country, but we run it to a legislated limit, and we cannot borrow or spend one penny above that. As you know, the clock ticks down to a particular midnight hour, literally at midnight on a certain day, when we hit the debt ceiling. As that hour approaches, will it be your organization's position that the debt ceiling should not be raised?
I don't think so, but again, it's...
You're not sure? Are you not sure about that?
Well, you're talking about a hypothetical here.
No, it's not a hypothetical. We know on the clock. As you know, it may occur. It depends on things like interest on the debt, which is not a discretionary spending item. Interest on the debt increases constantly. It is not something we can project exactly when we will hit the debt ceiling, but we are going to. It could be as early as March. It could be as late as June. It is going to happen. There's nothing hypothetical about it. It is a real doomsday scenario for this country and the world if people like Rand Paul prevent the debt ceiling from being increased and put this country into default, which has never happened in the history of the debt of the United States government. Do you think that your organization would support people who would be willing to do that?
Let me try to explain what I'm saying here. If the debt ceiling comes early in the next Congress, I don't think that any congressman has an opportunity to offer serious proposals to reduce the debt and put them on the table. I would hope that if it happens later in the Congress, that we have seen serious efforts to put spending programs on the table. And here's an opportunity for folks to compromise. I don't think that the government should default on its debts, but I also don't think that the government should continue to spend money that it doesn't have. So the real question is, what is the Congress going to do to make sure that we don't keep rubber stamping growing debts?
Mr. Kibbe, my apologies to interrupt you, but Marco Rubio, the senator-elect from Florida, is now giving his victory speech after that victory in the three-way battle there. And let's join Senator-elect Marco Rubio of Florida.
About what this election is about. What does it mean? And we still don't know all the results from around this country. But we know that tonight the power in the United States House of Representatives will change hands. We know tonight that a growing number of Republicans will now serve in the Senate as well. And we make a grave mistake if we believe that tonight these results are somehow an embrace of the Republican Party. What they are is a second chance. A second chance for Republicans to be what they said they were going to be not so long ago. You see, I learned early on in this campaign, in fact, it's what propelled me to enter it, that what this race was about the great future that lies ahead for our country, a future that Americans know is there for the taking. But it requires actions on our part. Americans believe with all their heart, the vast majority of them, and the vast majority of Floridians, that the United States of America is simply the single greatest nation in all of human history. A place without equal in the history of all mankind. But we also know that something doesn't seem right. Our nation is headed in the wrong direction, and both parties are to blame. And what Americans are looking for desperately are people that will go to Washington, D.C. and stand up to this agenda that is taking us in the wrong direction and offer a clear and genuine alternative. And that's what this race was about early on for me. And that's what it's about tonight. It is about the future of this country and what it will look like when our children are our age. Now let me tell you, there are those out there who doubt about the greatness of America. Sometimes when I say it, I hear the snickers from some in different parts. They think it's simplistic. But see, I know America is great not because I read about it in a book, because I've seen it with my eyes. I've been raised in a community of exiles, of people who lost their country, of people who know what it's like to live somewhere else. By the way, a community that I am proud to be a part of. A community of men and women that were once my age. And when they were, they had dreams like we have now. And yet they lost all those things through an accident of history. And so they came here to try to rebuild their lives. And some did, but many others could not. And instead it became the purpose of their life to leave their children with the opportunities they themselves did not have. This is the story of the Cuban exile community, and it defines what so many of us who are a product of it are. And I know this, no matter where I go or what title I may achieve, I will always be the son of exiles. And we will always be the heirs to 2 generations of unfulfilled dreams. The other way that I know about America's greatness is the story of a man that I knew well, of someone who wasn't born in this country. When he was 6 years old, he lost his mother. When he was 12, he lost his father. He grew up largely in a society where what you were going to be when you grow up was decided for you. This is like almost every other place in the world. Think about what that means. That means that before you are even born, how far you are going to get to go in life is decided for you by who your parents are or are not. And that's how it is almost everywhere in the world. And now this is how it was for that man. He was fortunate enough to make it here to America, where he was never able to capture his own dreams of his own youth. Instead, he made it the mission of his life to ensure that his children would have every opportunity he did not, that every door that was closed for him would be open for them, that the day would never come for them that came for him, the day when he realized that his own dreams would not be possible. And so now life was about opening pathways for his children. This story I know well, and it verifies to me the greatness of our country, because tonight, with your vote, you have elected his son to the United States Senate.
Senator-elect Marco Rubio, after a resounding victory by 20 points plus in the current tabulations in the three-way race in Florida, adding to the Republican night, mostly evidenced in the House, but to some degree seen in the Senate. Now we've got a concession speech out of Delaware from Christine O'Donnell. Get your popcorn.
Come on up, everybody. You guys should be proud. I'm gonna wait for David. Get up here. There's a lot of people who work very hard who should be up on this stage with me. June Chuck? No? All right. Oh, I cannot thank you enough. We worked hard. We had an incredible victory. Be encouraged. We have won. The Delaware political system will never be the same. Well, you know what I mean by... My joking big brother goes, we won? Did we miss something? You know what I meant. We were victorious because the Delaware political system will never be the same. That's a great thing. The Republican Party will never be the same. And that's a good thing. Our voices were heard, and we're not going to be quiet now. This is just the beginning. We've got a lot of work to do. I just got off the phone with my opponent, and I reminded him that he is now in a position to help the people of Delaware who are suffering. I reminded him of Victor Rodriguez and Donald and his family and the many small business owners who are very concerned about these tax hikes. And if he does raise them on the top 2%, they'll be forced to close their doors. I asked him to watch that 30-minute commercial that we did so that he can see what's going on in Delaware the way I have. And I asked him if he would talk to you and if he would take up my promise to, in this lame duck session, fight to stop the death tax from being reinstated this January 1st. So hopefully he will. And he's going to be up against his party leadership, but I asked him if he would sit down with some of the families who are very concerned about that and realize the difference he can make. So we can only hope and pray that he chooses to go against his party leadership and do what's right for the people of Delaware.
That's right.
But we're not going to stop fighting either. Because there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done. As I've said, this whole campaign is about putting the political process back into your hands. And that is where it is now. The leadership of our party is going to be drastically different this next year. The leadership in Delaware will be drastically different from now on. Our elected officials will be held accountable by their constituents, like it or not. So although the outcome isn't what we all worked so hard for, our voice was heard, will continue to be heard. So I hope and pray that you are as encouraged as I am. And we've got a lot of food, we've got the room all night, so God bless you. So let's party.
If you joined us during that and are not sure what you heard, that was what is going to pass for a concession speech from Christine O'Donnell, who was roundly defeated by someone who had been the Democratic underdog when the primary process started for the Republicans in Delaware, Chris Coons. As you see, 17%, 17 points is a lot of points, even in a state where 170,000 votes is going to get you elected senator. That's a big margin. And one could say that Ms. O'Donnell, in that set of demands that she just issued after not winning the race, doesn't know the meaning of defeat. And one could probably speculate that she doesn't know the meaning of several other words, but we'll let that pass.
She thinks she has incredible leverage over the new senator from the state of Delaware who just beat her by 17 points. But, you know, it is not only did she issue a set of demands, which is amazing, and not really concede, but she declared this is just the beginning. And I don't think she meant for her supporters to all go do something. I think she means for her to go do something. I think this is the start of Christine O'Donnell as political celebrity. I mean, this is a well well-trod path.
This is not the first time she's run for Senate, though. She ran a couple of years ago. She's going to run, you know, again when it comes up, or she's going to move to another state, or back to Pennsylvania. I don't know.
She can just go straight to TV. I mean, she really is. I don't mean this sarcastically at all. She's an incredibly polished television personality. That was essentially her job as a national conservative activist for years before she became a professional candidate. And so, I mean, Sarah Palin, there was a lot of Sarah Palin, I'm quitting being governor so that I can go lead the country. Remember when she quit on July 4th last year? A lot of that in that speech. And I think that Christine O'Donnell probably does land at Fox News or some other place.
Speaking of Sarah Palin, the scorecard has some losses on it for her. Yet another one in Delaware.
1-3 to this point, I think, was the terms of the Senate. We haven't named this.
She lost West Virginia.
The House seat in Delaware, too.
West Virginia Senate.
I wouldn't take that lightly. I get a sense, whatever you think of Christine O'Donnell, that the Tea Party movement is a movement. And it has not crested yet, probably. It's going to be a part of our lives 2 years from now. Well, just as I said tonight, all the Republicans who voted for McCain voted Republican this time. That's their base. That's 47%. Then you add to this the way they've radicalized some of the people in the center. And she's a classic example of someone who's going to keep pounding at the door all through the next 2 years. I think the Republican Party has begun a campaign against Barack Obama that has only begun.
Isn't the whole energy of the Tea Party, though, against John Boehner and not against a Barack Obama? I mean, it's all the biggest cheers. The biggest cheers in her non-speech right now were about how not just Delaware politics are changing, but the Republican Party is changing. This is an insurgent movement against Republicans, and they've now got Speaker Boehner.
Which Tea Party? The part that Dick Armey would like to control? Or
beware.
The other?
Beware. It's not going to quit.
But the Tea Party tonight and Christine O'Donnell managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in the Senate and in the House. So if that's the Tea Party, which of the Tea Parties Gene is talking about, the Democrats will fund them from the rest of the way on in. We'll see how that plays. Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri joins us as we continue on midterm night 2010. Stand by. The NBC News decision desk can now give you a projection on the Senate race in Missouri, and you see it there. The Republican Roy Blunt is the predicted winner. And here are the actual totals to this point, with 14% of the vote in over Robin Carnahan of the famous Missouri political family of the same name. 60-34. Quite a thumping at this point, but again, 85% plus yet to be counted. So the Senate at this hour continues to be a change of 3 seats from Democrat to Republican, and the look at this point with the outstanding seats making up the difference here from the total of obviously 100, unless you just got in from social studies class, 45-39 at this point. 2 governors' races to report on. No surprises, I suppose, in either one of them. In New York, Andrew Cuomo, the Attorney General of the state, son of the former governor, in a projected victory mode at this point over his opponent, Mr. Happy. The Texas governor's race, Rick Perry, the incumbent there, who had some problems in some polling, but obviously not enough to make us hesitate in projecting him as the winner to retain his seat as in the State House in Austin. We spoke of the Missouri Senate seat. Let's now talk to the incumbent senator, the senior senator from Missouri, Claire McCaskill, who joins us now. Senator, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Let's look at the big picture first as opposed to the state. It's pretty clear now, NBC News already projected, and many of the other news organizations tonight have projected that the House is going to go to the Republicans. It's not a big surprise by any stretch of the imagination. The margins may be still up for debate, but it's going to happen. How do you visualize a Senate in the hands, presuming that it does stay in the hands of the Democrats, and a House in the hands of the Republicans? How on earth would they work together and accomplish anything in the next 2 years?
Well, I want to remain optimistic, but one thing is very clear. The Republican Party has put up a no moderates welcome sign, and that makes it hard because most compromises come from the moderates in both parties getting together and trying to figure out where we can shave it and find compromises to get to that common ground, especially on the hard stuff. So I don't know. I do know this, that I've listened to the Republicans during this cycle, and I've listened to them talking about a smaller government and cutting spending, but they have refused to talk about the programs they're going to cut. And now the rhetoric has to match the reality, and that's where it's hard. You can't do something about our debt and our deficit unless you look at it is tax policy. And I don't know how they can realistically pledge that they're going to do something meaningful about the debt or deficit if they haven't been upfront and honest with the American people about that. And I think Democrats understand that. We're going to continue to focus like a laser on the middle class and on small businesses, but we got to do a better job of communicating.
You must have seen our interview with Congresswoman Blackburn earlier in the evening, where she described herself as in favor, essentially, of philosophical cuts, but couldn't mention any one of them practically by name. Hang on just a second, Senator, because we have a call out of Massachusetts and the governor's race there, which was too early previously, and now we can project that the Democratic governor of the state of Massachusetts of the Commonwealth has been reelected, Deval Patrick, with a hard count of 50-41, with well over the midpoint. So this was thought to be fairly close, but it is.
That's big.
Yep, exactly. Senator, you summed it up for me. It's big. The next question for you as we resume our interview with Senator McCaskill will be from Gene Robinson. I feel like suddenly I'm the old Meet the Press host.
I appreciate that, Keith. Senator McCaskill, your state is right in the middle of the country, and Missouri's kind of in the middle of the political spectrum, and it goes back and forth. So what should we learn from what's happening this evening? What will you take away? What should the Democratic Party take away, the nation take away?
First, let me compliment Robin Carnahan. She's an incredibly strong leader, and she joins a bunch of us that have had tough statewide losses, including the senator that has now been projected to win in this race, Roy Blunt, including our governor. So Robin is going to be around as a strong leader in the state for a long, long time, and she is terrific. And I think the values she talked about in this campaign will continue to resonate in Missouri. But what's really going on here, I think, is there's been a disconnect between what people are feeling around their kitchen table and what they're hearing on TV and in the newspapers and from Washington. And we've got to communicate at that kitchen table. We've got to make what we're doing relevant to them. We cut taxes. We cut small business taxes, and most Missourians don't even know it. We need to really take a look in the mirror and realize that we can do better communicating. I think we've been trying to help prosperity in this country by cutting taxes and by making college more affordable and doing some regulation of the folks that kind of brought the whole economy down. But I'm not sure that people in Missouri, especially those independent voters, even realize how hard we've been fighting for them.
Senator McCaskill, it's Lawrence O'Donnell here. You said that there's a no moderates sign at the Republican Party. What about at the Democratic Party? There was a recent op-ed piece in the New York Times saying that the Democratic Party should purge itself of the moderates and try to get more done with an ideologically coherent group of Democrats.
Well, I couldn't disagree with that more. There is a very strong and vibrant moderate caucus in the Democratic Party in the Senate, and it will remain. In fact, I think we've just added Joe Manchin to that caucus, the moderate part of the Democratic Party in the Senate. And I think that we can help. I think we can help promote the values that my party cares about without having to lose what is support in a center country. You know, Missouri is like the country. We have about a third of the folks that are Republicans and a third that are Democrats and a third that want to see in every election whether or not they're holding us accountable. So I think moderates have a very important part in our party, and I think it would be a big mistake if we started demanding ideological purity like the Republicans have. Watch the problems they're going to have internally in their party after this election. They're going to have some significant ones.
Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, I can see the glint in your eye as you say that, and we have it here, too, about that particular topic. Thank you kindly for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
Nora O'Donnell is standing by now with the mixed results facing the DNC chairman, Tim Kaine. Nora is with Governor Kaine. Nora?
Keith, good evening to you. You're right, mixed results, and we are joined by the governor. Big win in West Virginia with that Senate candidate. Let me ask you, though, you've talked about how the president will view this big win by the Republicans in the House. You said that the president would make adjustments and corrections. What's he going to do?
Well, you've already seen the president really start to tackle some issues that would be natural if Republicans want to cooperate. So the small business lending bill that the Democrats did in September overcame a months-long filibuster on the Republican side, but that's the kind of thing that Republicans say therefore trying to advance small business success without adding the federal deficit.
But this lame duck
deficit would be a second issue that they ought to be able to cooperate on, and the president's already starting to address that.
This lame duck Congress that's coming up, they're going to face a smorgasbord of tax cut issues. Will the president compromise with Republicans in terms of extending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans?
The president feels very strongly that you ought to target these tax cuts to the folks who need it, the middle class and small businesses, and that if you go beyond that, not only are you targeting it to folks who don't need it, but you bust the deficit. That's something the Republicans say they really care about. We can't talk out of both sides of our mouth on this. We've got to figure out a way to appropriately deal with spending and the deficit issue, and extending the tax cuts en masse is no way to do that.
No compromise.
It is. The president's been very, very clear that you got to target them the right way, and that also happens to help the economy. Middle class and small businesses will spend the tax cuts in ways that should continue this 9 months of private sector job growth.
You've got some of the best information about what's going on the ground in a lot of these key races we're still waiting for. Pennsylvania Senate. Sestak is holding on.
Yeah, he is, Nora. That is a very close race. We saw, early in the day, some of the trends were looking pretty good for the other guys. Late in the day, the voting trends were very strong for Democrats in southeastern Pennsylvania, especially, which is a huge portion of the state electorate. This one is going to be a late one, but the great news is that Sestak was down double digits by Labor Day and has fought this thing back to a draw.
Harry Reid in Nevada, is he ultimately going to pull that out?
We feel real good about the ground game there, and at the end of the day, I think that's going to be strategic for Harry Reid. I think he's going to win the race because of the ground game in Nevada.
All right, Governor, thank you so much. And Keith, there you heard, I've been talking to Democrats and Republicans all about Nevada, and the Democrats are still holding on. The Republicans say the Dems are full of baloney, so I think it's going to be a late night on Nevada. There you have it.
Or a little of both. Nora O'Donnell, thank you. Tim Kaine, thank you. And indeed, coming up at the top of the hour, the polls will have closed in 6 more states. We'll get our first look at Nevada, Reid versus Angle, Arizona, Iowa, Kansas, Montana, and Utah as well. The results when we return.